Cray was a regular loser who somehow ends up leading the greatest team of treasure hunters in the world, though what he really wanted was a quiet, peaceful life in the village where he was born. Becoming a treasure hunter even was the ridiculous dream of his childhood friends, who were obsessed with becoming famous heroes exploring ancient vaults packed with riches and dangerous monsters, and he was dragged into the midst of all that shit. The story kicks off with a group of kids full of dreams. One of them excitedly says they should become treasure hunters, imagining themselves venturing to treasure vaults around the world, claiming riches and glory. The others are fired up by the idea, agreeing that the 6 of them together could achieve their dream of becoming the strongest heroes in the world. Then the red-haired kid even mentions they should head to the capital Zabrudio one day. The scene then jumps to the present day and we see a cloaked man walking the bustling streets, musing about the life of treasure hunters. He explains that treasure hunters are like the celebrities of the imperial capital. They travel to ancient ruins and treasure vaults scattered across the world, risking their lives to claim hidden treasures. For the danger of fighting terrifying monsters known as phantoms, they're rewarded with wealth and honor. Then as the man walks, a tavern comes into view. He notes that today inside this tavern, one of the most powerful clans called First Steps is holding interviews for new party members. He explains that a clan is essentially a gathering of parties, like a mutual aid society. There's only so much an explorer can do on their own. If you want to climb to higher levels, it's crucial to join a strong party and grow alongside your allies. Then, while standing in line to get into the tavern, the man admits to himself that he was never able to reach that point. Suddenly, a girl behind him strikes up a conversation, asking if he's here to form a party too. Apologizing for the sudden chat, she introduces herself as Runa Runebeck, an explorer certified at level 3. The guy responds, introducing himself as Cry Andre, but then when Ruda offers to shake his hand, he doesn't take it. She then seems surprised at the huge crowd gathered for the interviews and confides that she's been exploring solo until now, and she struggled with a treasure shrine called the White Wolf's Den, which led her to finally consider joining a party. Another explorer nearby overhears their conversation and scoffs, thinking Ruda is out of her depth for trying to tackle that treasure shrine at level 3, and he smugly tells her that a place like that isn't for amateurs like her. Ruda understandably doesn't appreciate being called an amateur by a total stranger, but the guy doubles down, explaining that First Steps is one of the top clans in the imperial capital. Sure, level 3 might be considered mid-level in the outside world, but here, it's basically beginner status. He advises her to turn around and go home, which only makes Ruda angrier, so she draws her knives. Before things can escalate, the guards conducting the interviews step in. They warn them to calm down, saying they'll be forced to kick them out if they cause a scene. The guard scolds them, reminding them that an explorer should never draw their weapons in the streets. With that, the tension settles, and the next scene shifts to Cry and Ruda inside the tavern. Ruda is taken aback by the sheer number of applicants and admits she's never been in a place like this before, so she curiously asks Cray if he's been through something like this before, and he casually replies that this is his 5th time. Ruda then surprisingly feels a little bad for him, but Cray brushes it off, telling her there's no need for sympathy. He then explains that being an explorer is all about skill. Talented people rise to the top quickly, but for those who aren't as gifted, it's a much tougher road. Ruda then points out a flashy party in the tavern, asking Cry about them. Cry informs her that they're the Holy Spirit's son called Ark Brave, currently looking for new members. They're the ones who recently conquered a level 7 treasure vault, and they're considered one of the best parties around. Their leader Ark Rodin is known for recognizing talent, and if he recognizes an explorer, that person's success is practically guaranteed, but Cray admits this is the first time he's seen them conducting interviews. Ruda then notices an empty seat and asks about it, but before Cry can answer, the rude guy from earlier butts in again, arrogantly declaring that Ruda is clueless. He says he'll enlighten her whether she wants it or not. Despite her telling him to stop, he introduces himself as Greg Zangief, a level 4 certified explorer. He points out that the empty seat belongs to the founder of the Grievers, one of the most respected parties in the capital. Cry then explains that the Grievers came to the capital a few years ago as a fresh new party, and they quickly rose to prominence due to their immense talent. Their official name is Grieving Souls, and as Cry reveals, they are the party of his childhood friends. Greg's still budding and mentions that rumors are swirling about the Grievers recruiting a new member for the first time in years, which is why so many explorers have gathered. However, Greg dismisses the rumor as false, pointing out that no one is sitting at the founder's table. One of the other participants speaks up, asking where the Grievers are. He boldly declares that he only came to join them because they're considered the best. Full of himself, he brags that one day he'll be the strongest explorer ever, revealing he's already a level 4 certified explorer. Suddenly, a girl from the management staff steps forward and confronts the loudmouth. Without holding back, she tells him to get out. Some of the other staff members rush to calm her down, reminding her they're not supposed to stir up any trouble today. But the girl isn't having any of it, and she snaps back saying that her sister would have done the same thing if she were here. The tension builds as the two prepare to fight, and Cray, sensing the incoming chaos, tells Ruta they should get out before things get messy. Ruta follows him out just as the brat Gilbert tries to attack the girl Tino. But before he can land a blow, Tino quickly notices Cray's presence. She locks eyes with him, and just as Gilbert charges, she expertly dodges his attack and corners Cray instead. With Gilbert still flailing, Tino turns to Cray, calling him master, and asks what he's doing here. It's then revealed that Cray isn't just some random explorer, he's actually the leader of Grieving Souls and the clan master that everyone's been talking about. Cray begins to explain that everything started several years ago when he and his group left their village as fresh newcomers eager to explore. They quickly conquered several beginner treasure vaults, one after the other. But one day, while exploring a vault, a monster attacked Cray, but one of his friends killed it just in time. The friend praised Cray for acting as a decoy. Cray, however, knew the truth. He hadn't even noticed the monster was there. In that moment, he realized something critical. Though they all shared the same dream, their talents were far from equal. He recognized himself as just an ordinary guy in comparison and started to feel like a burden. He knew his friends were too kind to tell him to leave, so he decided on his own to quit the party. But when Cray tried to talk to them about it, they all dodged the topic, saying they still hadn't chosen a leader yet. Then the red-haired guy in their group suggested that Cray should be their leader, and the others immediately agreed, saying Cray was perfect for the role since he was good at giving speeches and motivating everyone, so Cray didn't even get the chance to refuse. Fast forward several years, and Cray is still the leader of the party, made up of his childhood friends. He admits that while he holds this role, he's long wanted to retire from being an explorer. Ruta then is still stunned and can't believe Cray is the clan master of First Steps, and even Ark joins in teasing Cray. Ark recalls how Cray had claimed he was late because he overslept, but now it seems like he was just secretly assessing the participants by blending in with them. Cray corrects him, saying that he really did oversleep, but Ark refuses to believe him. Cray then comments that much like Ark, most explorers just don't listen to people. Tino, visibly annoyed, says Ark is being downright rude and jokes that they should kick him out of the clan. Ark laughs, thinking Tino's sense of humor is hilarious. We also learn that Tino is a level 4 certified explorer, and Cray explains that she's a solo explorer in First Steps and also one of his childhood friends, as well as a disciple of Liz, one of their strongest members. Ark asks Cray if he's found any good candidates, and Cray, in his usual snarky way, wonders if Ark would actually take the person he recommends into his party. Ark, without hesitation, says he would because he trusts Cray's judgment, and the whole tavern is shocked to hear this. Ark's party mates try to warn him against it, but Ark stands firm, saying he'll only take in a single person suggested by Cray. Cray then asks if it can really be anyone, and Ark leaves it completely up to him. Cray thinks to himself that Ark really does have a big heart, though he notices one of Ark's party mates glaring at him for this. Cray then glances at Tino, and she immediately assumes he's going to choose her. She proudly declares that she's made up her mind to stay by Cray's side, now and always. She even adds that she has no interest in joining that wannabe handsome guy's party. Meanwhile, Gilbert starts causing a scene again, loudly announcing that he's going to be the one to join Ark's party. Cray recalls that Gilbert boasted about being level 4 and wonders if he's even in a party at all. Gilbert brushes it off, saying it shouldn't matter. Cray starts thinking that maybe this guy could be an asset if Ark trains him right. But Cray admittedly knows his eye for talent isn't great, so it might come down to luck. Cray then tells Gilbert he'll recommend him to Ark, but there's a catch. He asks Gilbert what he thinks is the most important thing for an explorer. When Gilbert can't answer, Cray tells him not to lose. He warns that if Gilbert lacks strength, he could put his entire party in danger. So Cray needs to see if Gilbert has what it takes. He casually mentions that ever since he became an explorer, he's never lost once. The crowd is shocked by this, though Cray thinks to himself that the only reason it's true is because he's never actually had a proper fight. Cray pulls off a ring from his finger and tells everyone that whoever manages to get their hands on this relic will be the one he recommends to Ark. He tosses the ring into the air. Gilbert catches it, but before he can celebrate, Tino sends him flying with a powerful kick. The ring rolls onto the ground, and suddenly the entire tavern erupts into chaos as everyone scrambles to grab it, so the place is turned upside down. Meanwhile, Cray casually slips out, leaving the participants to wreck the tavern over his little test. The next day, Vice Clan Master Eva Renfeed informs Cray that the tavern incident has made the news. She reveals that the venue was completely wrecked due to his reckless actions. Cray then immediately asks if there were any civilian casualties and is relieved to hear there were none. However, Eva adds that the Explorers Association wants to have a word with him. Cray wonders if Ark had anything to say about the chaos, and Eva tells him that Ark just laughed after reading the article. Cray shakes his head, thinking Ark's far too easygoing, and suggests they charge the repair bill to Ark's account and send him to the association as well. Eva sighs, telling Cray he relies on Ark way too much. This time, though, the association specifically asked for Cray. Realizing he can't get out of it, Cry grumbles, knowing he has to go or else the branch manager might come after him instead. He then complains about not wanting to leave without an escort and mentions that his disguise relic, a powerful artifact called Reversible Face, which allows him to change his appearance, has broken. Eva rolls her eyes, assuring him no one's going to attack him this early in the day, so with no other choice, Cry reluctantly heads out. Later, we see Cry groveling before the association manager, apologizing for the whole tavern disaster. He explains that no civilians were harmed and that once the chaos started, he couldn't stop it. He points out that the building was the only thing damaged and surprisingly, no one has filed a formal complaint. To sweeten the deal, he mentions that the tavern's owner is a friend of his and he's sure they'll forgive him. A young woman at the manager tells Cry to calm down, handing him a book. The association manager, Grack Welter, sternly reminds Cray that a high-ranking clan like First Steps should be setting a good example for others. Letting Cry off without consequences would send the wrong message. Cry, sensing where this is going, realizes he's about to get stuck with a chore. He explains that the Hunters Association receives all kinds of job requests, many of which are tough time consuming and pay so poorly that no one wants to take them on. Hunters call these unwanted tasks chores, and Cray is not a fan of the idea. Resigned to his fate, Cray flips through the list of available chores, most of which are meant for level 4 explorers or higher, but eventually he finds a level 3 task that seems a bit easier and snatches it up without thinking too hard about it, and we find out that he chose a rescue mission. Afterwards, we see Cry leaving the association and Grack watches him, thinking to himself that Cry hasn't changed a bit. He reveals that Cry, without realizing it, picked one of the most difficult-looking chores. Later, Cry discovers that Ark isn't at the guild headquarters, and Tino informs him that Ark has been summoned by some nobles. As Cry looks around and notices the place is empty, Tino approaches and shows him the ring he tossed the previous day, so Cray realizes she's the one who ended up with it. Tino proudly admits she didn't want anyone else getting their hands on his ring, and she nervously asks if she can keep it. And Cry tells her it's just a shooting ring, so she can have it. Then Cry casually asks if she's free right now. Tino, expecting a date, excitedly says she is, but her excitement vanishes when Cry hands her the chore he received from the association, so she horrifiedly bolts the second she sees it, but Cry calmly summons his magical chain Silver and orders it to bring her back. Moments later, Silver drives a reluctant and frustrated Tino back to Cry. She's visibly upset, accusing Cray of playing with her feelings. She thought he was asking her out, but instead he's saddling her with a crappy job. All she wanted was to get ice cream with him, not get stuck with an awful mission. She complains that the job is terrible and that as a level 4 explorer, there's no way she can rescue 5 people on her own. Cry agrees, nodding sympathetically, but Tino also adds that she already knows he's only sending her on this mission for her personal growth. Cry, scratching his head, starts wondering if the mission is really that tough since it's labeled as level 3. Realizing Tino just doesn't want to tackle the task alone, Cray decides to pair her up with 3 new recruits, Ruta, Gray, and Gilbert. Tino isn't thrilled with the arrangement, still hoping she'd be exploring alongside Cray instead, but despite her grumbling, Cray hopes the group will be able to handle the mission together. 6 years ago, when Cray's party first rolled into the capital, they were on their way to the association to officially sign up as hunters. But right when they reached the door, Cray started second-guessing everything. Luke told him to stop overthinking it, especially since Cray was the one who insisted they shoot for being the best in the capital. But Cray isn't doubting his friend's strength. He's worried because he knows he'll only drive them down. Luke told him to quit the nonsense and, without missing a beat, marched up to the doors, flinging them open with a loud declaration that he was the strongest swordsman in the world. Right after, Liz jumped in, shouting that she was the strongest thief in the world. With such a ridiculous, over-the-top entrance, there's no turning back. So Cray walks up to the reception desk to register the party, but deep down he's already hoping they'll regret making him the leader. So when asked to choose a name for the party, he picks the edgiest thing he can think of and calls them Grieving Soul, for absolutely no reason. The rest of the group hated it at first, thinking the name was dark and depressing. But the moment Cray tried to use his awful naming skills as an excuse to step down as leader, they all suddenly changed their minds, claiming they loved the name. Fast forward to the present, and Cray calls a meeting with everyone he's trying to dump his work onto. Greg, still in disbelief, can't wrap his head around the fact that Cray is actually the guild master of the Grievers. As crazy as it sounds, Cray confirms it, meaning he's also the infamous 1,000 Tricks that everyone's heard of. In the association, when a hunter hits a certain level of fame and achievement, they're given special titles, turning them into almost celebrity-like figures. Cray ended up with 1,000 Tricks as his title, but Gilbert refuses to believe any of it, since 1,000 Tricks is supposed to be the strongest person in the capital, and Cray looks like he's never even seen the inside of a training hall. Tino immediately jumps to Cray's defense, insisting that Gilbert is just too weak to understand Cray's power. Meanwhile, Cray's standing there, clueless as ever, wondering what power she's even talking about. He knows he only gets called the strongest because his friends constantly shower him with undeserved praise. But whatever, he asks if Gilbert and the others are going to take the job. Of course, Gilbert refuses because he's still not buying that Cry is the strongest in the city. Greg then tries to shut him up, nervous about what could happen if the actual strongest person in the capital loses his temper. But Gilbert, being the jerk he is, just shoves his fingers up Greg's nose. Since Gilbert clearly has no interest in cooperating, Cray shrugs it off and moves on to Greg. Greg's more than happy to accept Cray's request, so the only one left to ask is Ruta. Given that the quest is in a wolf den, Cry figures it's a perfect fit for her, since she was already planning to clear it. Ruta isn't exactly thrilled with the group she's stuck with, but she agrees to go along with it. Cray's pleased to hear that, so he tells Tino she can ask anyone else from the clan to help if she needs it. Tino, practically begging, pleads with Cry to join the team himself, but he shuts her down immediately. With Tino's party situation now sorted, Cray turns to leave, but of course, Gilbert can't just let things go. Upset that Cray's ignoring him, he challenges Cray to a duel. If he loses, he'll join the team. Cray, who absolutely hates getting dragged into duels, comes up with a quick fix. He agrees to the duel, but only if Tino fights in his place. Tino is more than happy with this arrangement, mainly because she's furious with Gilbert for daring to insult and doubt her master. She's also eager to show off her skills and give Cry a little demonstration of just how flexible she can be, throwing in some impressive camera angles for good measure. Gilbert might have gotten his face smashed in by Tino yesterday, but he's still running his mouth, claiming he was just caught off guard and that there's no way he'll lose to her again. And after he beats Tino, he says he's coming for Cry next. Cry, already irritated, has absolutely no desire to fight anyone today. But since Gilbert is so cocky, Cry casually points out that Tino is level 4 just like him. Tino chimes in, saying there's no way she could ever lose to someone like Gilbert, and to prove her point, she drops her weapons on the ground, daring him to fight. Ruta and Greg are getting nervous because sure, Tino's strong, but fighting without weapons seems like a terrible idea. Normally, Tino would win hands down because even though they're the same level, she earned all her experience doing solo missions and has tons of practice fighting other people, so she should win even unarmed. But Gilbert's got the Purgatorial Flame sword, which could tip the odds in his favor if he uses it right. Or at least it could have if he hadn't thrown his sword down too, deciding to fight barehanded. That was without question a dumb move, but Gilbert won't tolerate being looked down on, so he insists on fighting on equal terms. Now Tino's even more confident she'll win, so she casually mentions she'll grab some ice cream with Cry after she's done beating Gilbert up. Then as the fight begins, she charges at him, aiming for his face. Gilbert dodges the first blow, but can avoid the follow-up, a vicious kick to the face that sends him flying, just like last time. It looks like it's over, but to his credit, Gilbert gets back up and charges in again. Not that it helps, he gets caught in a chokehold almost immediately, but at least the guy's got some spirit. After some effort and training on his part, Gilbert finally manages to break free from Tino's hold. But unfortunately for him, the moment he does, she drops him to the ground with a clean chop to the back of his head, so he's definitely not getting up this time. As Tino celebrates her victory, she thanks Cry for helping her become so strong, even though Cry never actually did a thing to train her. Greg and Ruta are left absolutely floored by Tino's strength, while Gilbert just can't accept that someone might actually be stronger than him. Since the day he first picked up a sword, Gilbert always believed he was destined to be a hunter. His training allowed him to surpass professional swordsmen with ease, and when he finally reached the age to register as a hunter, he headed straight for the capital and formed a small party to start clearing vaults. Up until now, he had never known defeat. Even though Tino isn't fond of him, she still respects Gilbert's skill, so she encourages him to pick up his sword and keep fighting. But Gilbert's stubborn and his pride refuses, so Tino shakes her head, disappointed knowing that foolish pride like his is a one-way ticket to getting killed. As much as Gilbert hates to admit it, Tino's right. If this had been a real fight, he'd be dead several times over by now, so he's forced to confront the harsh reality that he's not as strong as he thought. Right then, Cry chimes in, casually guessing that Gilbert probably left his previous party due to a difference in strength. Gilbert is floored because Cry is spot on. Cry goes on to explain that he's dealt with similar issues in his own party, though he didn't quit, even if he might have wanted to. Gilbert totally misinterprets this, thinking it means Cry completely outclasses his teammates, and that Grieving Soul, the strongest party in the capital, is miles ahead of everyone. So this gives Gilbert a whole new understanding of what it really means to be the strongest. Cry then notices Gilbert's sword and gives it a light tap, just to see what it's capable of. At his command, flames immediately start pouring out of it, much larger than anything Gilbert has ever been able to summon. Gilbert is absolutely floored. He's owned the sword for ages, but has never managed to produce flames even close to this, let alone control them the way Cray just did, with a mere tap, and even without grabbing the handle. In this world, mana material is the lifeblood of everything. It's everywhere, just invisible to the naked eye. But inside treasure vaults, mana condenses into all sorts of physical forms, turning into everything from bizarre crystals to rare artifacts. The White Wolf's Den is one of these vaults known for spawning blood-soaked wolf phantoms. Naturally, Cry is more than relieved he sent the others down there and didn't have to deal with it himself. Eva, however, questions his decision. Was it really smart to send such inexperienced hunters into a place like the Wolf's Den? Cry waves it off, saying it's only a level 3 vault, and those 4 are pretty skilled for their level. Besides, he just has to thank Eva for the info on Gilbert, because watching Gilbert freak out when Cry randomly guessed a bunch of stuff about his past was pure gold. Eva's glad she could be of help, but she's more curious about how Cry handled Gilbert's relic like it was child's play, so she wants to know his secret. Cry shrugs, saying the relic was pretty straightforward. One of those he can control right off the bat. Even someone as green as Gilbert could use it with minimal training, so Cry doesn't see what's so impressive about it. But being the relic hoarder that he is, he's already debating whether to ask Gilbert to sell him the sword. Eva shuts that idea down immediately. Cray's already blown through a huge chunk of his budget on relic collecting. His collection is massive as it is, so why on earth would he need yet another one? Cray's eyes light up, insisting that each relic is one of a kind, and even though he's sitting on over 20 relic rings alone, there's always room for one more. Eva, realizing it's pointless to argue, just sighs. Sure, Cry has a solid income, but she can't let him blow it all on his obsession. See, the profits of Grieving Soul are split evenly among all members, regardless of what they actually contribute. So even though Cry barely lifts a finger, he still gets a fat paycheck every month. And there's no way he's giving up his relic addiction anytime soon. Then, when one of his relics needs recharging, he seizes the opportunity to dodge the conversation. He heads over to a member of the association and asks for a little help charging it up with magic, and they're more than happy to oblige since Cray's always doing so much for them. While Cray's relic is being charged, the guy helping him casually mentions a rogue phantom that popped up on the northern road and completely wrecked a caravan. There were 3 level 3 hunters guarding it, so this phantom has to be seriously strong. Now the Third Order Knights are recruiting for an extermination party. According to reports, the phantom was a wolf, and the location is near the White Wolf Den, meaning it likely came from there. There was probably a mass spawning of wolves, so the den is probably crawling with enemies at this very moment. Anyone unlucky enough to be down there is in for a world of hurt. Cry tries to brush off his concern, telling himself Tino's party is probably fine. But then the people around him start chatting about how the monsters in the White Wolf Den have been growing stronger lately, to the point where the association is considering bumping up its threat level. Worse still, a well-known level 5 Lancers party went missing inside that vault. So if even a level 5 team couldn't handle it, anyone below that level doesn't stand a chance. Now Cry is seriously worried and decides to double-check the quest he received earlier. Only now does he realize it wasn't just a random mission, it was a rescue job for Lancer Rudolph and his level 5 team. Cray should have actually read the quest details before sending Tino and the others into that death trap, but it's too late to call them back now. The people sitting with him notice something's off and ask if everything's okay. Cray admits that he sent Tino into the White Wolf Den. The two are horrified, realizing that Cray sent a level 4 down into a vault that even a level 5 party couldn't survive. They assumed Cry knew how dangerous it was and sent her as part of her training, because what kind of reckless teacher would send his student into a deadly mission without researching it first? Cry, feeling the pressure, suddenly stands up, muttering that he's got something urgent to take care of. Once Cry gets into the halls, he starts having a full-blown panic attack. He tries to calm himself, thinking Tina is pretty skilled. Maybe she can handle this. And Gilbert is almost as strong as her, at least when he's got his flame sword. But then it hits him. He drained all the power from that sword during his little demonstration. So if Gilbert didn't recharge it afterward, that sword's about as useful as a paperweight. Cut to Tino and the others as they make their way toward the White Wolf Den. Even before they reach it, they can feel a dangerous aura closing in. Tino, however, was expecting something like this. After all, it was Cray who sent her on this mission, and she had a gut feeling things might get dicey. That's why she even wrote a will, just in case she doesn't make it back. Still, she's confident she won't die. In her mind, Cray's got everything perfectly planned out. She believes he chose each member for the mission with careful deliberation, though Greg isn't buying it. He reminds her that Cray only met them yesterday. Gilbert agrees it seems unlikely, but at the same time, he wouldn't put it past Cray to have already done a full background check on all of them before they even met. In fact, the whole incident at the pub could have been part of his plan. So while this mission is way out of their league, Hino is convinced that Cray wouldn't send them on a suicide run. Unfortunately, that's exactly what Cray did, and he's absolutely freaking out about it. Realizing he sent them straight into a death trap, he decides to rescue them himself. Rushing into his hidden room, he starts grabbing every relic he can carry. Meanwhile, Tino and the others encounter a phantom who is wielding a sword and wearing armor, and they are surprised as they were expecting a wolf. Back to Cry, while he is leaving, Eva catches sight of him and of course assumes this was all part of Cray's grand test for Tino. She figures he planned it so Tino wouldn't actually be in any real danger, but thinks he must be slightly worried, so he's going to check on them. Shiga notices he's carrying Citri's Slime relic, which by the way is totally illegal under Imperial law. But Cry doesn't know what he's walking into, so he's taking every precaution. Cry heads out onto the balcony and straps on a wingsuit relic, aiming to get to the White Wolf den as fast as possible. As he takes off, Eva watches him go, quietly hoping he doesn't end up like the last guy who used that wingsuit, who died after crashing headfirst into a wall. The story shifts to the past again, showing it's been a week since grieving souls began their work in the capital of Zabrudia. Luke's standing there, staring at his broken wooden sword, completely dumbfounded. How could it have snapped just like that? But the others in his group aren't surprised at all, saying it's no shock since he was fighting phantoms. One of them mentions she never expected to face a Cyclops in a level 1 treasure vault. They all agree it was one tough phantom, guessing it was at least a level 4. Then some random hunter shows up, doubting their story, but the girls casually show him the Cyclops head they took as proof. He freaks out at the sight, while Cry just shakes his head, thinking this is exactly why he told them not to bring the head along. Next, the scene cuts to Tino and the gang having just taken down a wolf-like monster, but they're absolutely spent. Ruta points out that this creature doesn't seem like something you'd encounter in a level 3 vault, and everyone agrees it was way too much. Greg then turns to Gilbert, asking why he didn't use the flames from his sword. Gilbert says his sword's out of mana because Cry had used it earlier, and now he can't recharge it himself. Ruta suggests they should retreat. The situation's not what they were led to believe, and the people they were supposed to rescue might already be dead. But Tino, stubborn as ever, refuses to back down, arguing they haven't even entered the vault yet. Greg then pushes back, saying survival is more important than any mission, but Tino calmly explains he's got it wrong. They're not here to collect corpses. She's certain those people are still alive, and they're just following the plan of a level 8 hunter. She goes on to say that even the Purgatorial Sword running out of mana is probably part of Cray's big plan, teaching them not to lean so much on relics. They then get closer to the treasure vault and notice several crimson wolves inside, all equipped with armor and weapons. It hits them that the wolf they faced earlier wasn't just some random outlier. There's more. So Tino then explains that the White Wolf's den was built to accommodate the massive Silver Moon wolf monsters that originally live here. She's convinced the wolves won't be able to move easily inside the vault due to their size and suggests they head in to engage them. But before she can act, Gilbert, being rash as ever, decides to charge at the monsters, thinking he can take them down if he just disarms them. Tino shakes her head, thinking he's an idiot, but Gilbert, of course, insists the Purgatorial Sword is stronger than any regular weapon, even without mana. Tino, however, tells him to stop acting recklessly because she's the leader and her job is to bring everyone back alive. She's certain her master is testing her leadership, and bringing her team home in one piece is the bare minimum to pass the test. Tino explains her plan. She and Ruta, being the fastest, will draw the wolves' attention, while the others will attack from behind. She points out that once they close the distance, the wolves' ranged weapons will be useless. She makes it clear there will be no sacrifices, and she won't let anyone be used as a shield. Meanwhile, Cry is flying towards them, his only concern being that Tino survives until he arrives. He doesn't care if she has to use her teammates as meat shields as long as she lives. Back at the vault, Tino and her team follow her plan, and after some hard work, they manage to defeat all the wolves. But Tino exhaustedly thinks this job is completely unreasonable. As they're catching their breath, more phantoms appear. Tino then takes a moment to reflect on her team. She admits that all in all, the party lineup isn't bad. Greg works well with everyone thanks to his experience. Gilbert might be a loudmouth, but he's strong, and Ruta doesn't stand out much, but her enemy detection skills are spot on. In fact, it's because of Ruta that Tino has been able to focus on fighting. Then as they take on the new wave of monsters, Tino thinks to herself that her master must have calculated every little detail, so he's like a god with how perfect his plan is. While fighting, Gilbert then starts thinking about his old party mates. He remembers how he pushed them too hard, frustrated that they couldn't keep up with him. He knew they were trying their best, but the gap between their abilities and his just kept growing wider. That's why he eventually left the party. Now that he finally gets it, he understands why they were so desperate. He realizes he never considered their feelings, and it hits him. He had no idea that fighting alongside a team as equals could feel this good. With that thought in mind, they defeat the monsters and make their way into a large room. Tino suddenly senses a presence ahead. She's convinced it's the boss, and it's a big one. Greg immediately cautiously suggests they run, but Tino unfazedly points out that they've come this far without a scratch, so why not take down the boss too? Greg remains hesitant, and Tino tells him that safe missions don't help people grow, but she admits that caution has its place, but sometimes they just need to go with the flow. Greg, after thinking it over, agrees she has a point. He then explains that once a hunter reaches level 4, they can make a living just by completing treasure vaults beneath their level. He admits that every time he thought a battle was unwinnable, he avoided it, and that instinct came from watching too many of his comrades die. Tino is sure Greg joined First Steps because he wanted to change that mindset, and she believes that's why her master placed him in this party. Greg isn't convinced, but Tino assures him that her master wouldn't have chosen someone he didn't believe in. She explains that her master's goal was to save all of them, and that he's like a god in how he operates. She's certain this group wasn't thrown together by chance. Everything was calculated by him. Ruta is still unsure and wonders aloud why he picked her of all people. Tino, after a brief pause, jokes that it might be because of her big melon, and without missing a beat, she continues ahead, leaving Ruta puzzled and blushing, asking what she even means by that. After that, we see Cry flying over the forest near the treasure vault, and of course he can't spot Tino anywhere. He grumbles that this relic is way too fast and wonders who the heck would make something without brakes. He enters the vault, crashing into the walls like a maniac as he flies inside. Meanwhile, Tino and the crew are facing the vault's boss, a massive white wolf. It lunges at them, but they manage to dodge, all thinking the same thing. This thing's way too strong. Tino then notices the boss isn't wearing a helmet, and she figures its head might be the weak spot. Determined to overcome this trial set by her master, she presses on. So Gilbert then steps up and blocks the monster's next attack, while Greg rushes in but gets launched backwards from the sheer power of the beast. Tino, quick on her feet, uses her agility to close the gap, dodging every swipe the wolf throws at her. Ruta observes Tino, and she is impressed because there's not a single shred of fear in Tino. The monster then turns its attention to Greg, and his sword snaps as he tries to block. The beast then moves in on Tino, but she takes the chance by climbing its weapon to deliver the final blow to take it down. But just as they catch their breath, they notice that the phantom manages to slash Tino's leg. Ruta rushes over asking if she's okay, but Tino waves her off saying she got a potion and quickly heals herself. Then we see that Greg looks distraught over his broken sword, but Gilbert bluntly tells him to be thankful he's still breathing. Greg agrees and sighs, saying they just got to find the missing people now, so Tino nods and hands him the sword of the boss they just defeated. Suddenly, they're ambushed by 4 monsters, all resembling the wolf they just fought. They can't believe 4 of them at once, so Tino feels the pressure, thinking this is way too much even for them, and she's left wondering what her master was thinking when he sent them into this mess. Greg, clearly anxious, asks what they should do next, so Tino quickly tells everyone to retreat into the narrow passage on the right because the monsters are too big to move well in there. But before they can make it, the monsters catch on and block their escape route, figuring out their plan. Gilbert and Greg then offer to act as bait, telling the girls to make a run for it, but Ruta hesitates, unsure if it's a good idea. But Greg insists it's better than all of them getting wiped out, and Tino, feeling stuck, wonders if this is seriously their best option. Lost in thought, she starts thinking about her master and suddenly remembers something. She then snaps back, telling everyone that no one's being sacrificed today, and she tells them to target the monster's eyes. Gilbert and the others rush to fight off the creatures just to give her the opening she needs. Tino recalls the training she did with the ring her master gave her, and with determination, she uses the same move to strike the monster's eyes, blinding one just long enough. Gilbert, seeing his shot, charges in, only to get hurled into the wall by the beast, getting wrecked in the process. Despite the pain, he mumbles an apology for jumping the gun, but Tino reassures him he did nothing wrong. As they're surrounded by 4 monstrous nightmares, it starts to sink in they might not make it out of this. Then out of nowhere, Cry crashes into one of the beasts, finally ending his wild ride, and Tino can't hide her relief at seeing him. Greg then quickly notices the creatures seem freaked out by Cray, but the monster that Cray crashed into, probably feeling brave, goes in for an attack, but one of Cray's rings protects him. The monster's shock is obvious when its attack fails miserably, and Cry, ever the showman, casually lies about having 17 lives. Then, without skipping a beat, he uses another ring to unleash a devastating blast, leaving everyone stunned by his insane power. Meanwhile, Cry, baffled by the strength of these creatures, wonders what the hell they are and questions if this is even still a level 3 vault. Despite his attack, the monster gets back up, leaving the others stunned. But Cray isn't surprised. He knows his shot rings are flashy but not particularly strong. Glancing at the weapons the monsters are carrying, he feels relieved that for once he brought 17 barrier rings with him. Still, he doesn't care about the rescue mission anymore. He just wants to go home, but unfortunately, the monsters aren't giving him that luxury. They prepare to attack, leaving him no choice but to use the necklace he's wearing. Cray drinks from the necklace, and then he tosses it into the air and shoots it with a shot ring, creating a cloud of smoke. And then he quickly tells everyone to run while they have cover. Then as they sprint away, the group can't help but feel that they're moving painfully slow. Ruta assumes Cry is keeping pace with Tino's injury in mind, but we soon learn the truth. This is as fast as Cry can run. As they escape, Tino reflects on her master's kindness, remembering the first time they met. Back then, she was being bullied by some rough-looking men, and it was the grieving souls who saved her. After asking their name, she'd been determined to join them ever since. Once they finally manage to escape from the monsters, the group expresses their gratitude to Cry for saving them. It's only then that Cry notices Tino's injury, and he apologizes for sending them on such a dangerous mission. Tino reassures him, saying it's no big deal, and Cry praises her for doing so well despite the circumstances, and his compliment makes her visibly happy. Cry then pulls out a relic and uses it to completely heal her leg, and Gilbert shockingly can't believe Cry is using a relic just for healing. Cry, in his usual blunt manner, thinks to himself that he uses relics for pretty much everything. Greg, still processing everything, asks if Cry defeated the monsters. Cry admits he didn't and explains that running was the best option at that moment, and he urges them not to dwell on it and tells them to follow him. As they do, Cry has a sinking realization. He has no idea where they are or where the exit is, leaving him silently wondering what on earth he's supposed to do now. The story then flashes back to 6 years ago, where Luke and the others first lay eyes on Cray's collection of relics. They're blown away by the sight of them, so Liz asks Cry to pick one out just for her. Cry then casually mentions that he did promise to do that, and Luke, not wanting to be left out, protests that's not fair, and asks Cry to pick relics for him too. Soon enough, the whole group chimes in with the same request. Then one of the party members curiously points to a relic and asks about it. So Cry explains it's a magic bag, one that can store more items than it seems. The girl is impressed and realizes the bag must warp space, thinking it's a rare and valuable item. But Cry quickly deflates her excitement, revealing it can only store chocolates, and that quickly changes her enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Liz puts on a bracelet from the relics and admires how cute it looks. But in seconds, she stumbles and can't get up. Cry then explains it's actually a labyrinth ring, which completely messes with a person's spatial awareness. Liz, now frustrated, struggles on the ground as Cry continues, casually adding that most people who wear it end up tearing their bodies apart from the disorientation, and the fact that Liz is still in one piece pretty astounding. Next, Luke picks up a wicked-looking sword, clearly drawn to how cool it looks. Cry tries to warn him, telling him it's a cursed blade, but Luke's already too late. The moment he touches it, he goes into a full frenzy. His party scrambles to hold him down while Cray's collection of relics ends up causing absolute chaos. In the end, it's explained that these relics were later turned into training gear for Luke and Liz. The story then jumps back to the present, where Cry is quietly losing it. He knows Tino and Ruta are both thieves, so he really wishes they'd be out doing some recon or something useful. Instead, they seem to have complete faith in Cray's ability to navigate, even though he has no clue where he's going. Then Gilbert chimes in full of admiration, certain that the great Cray must have everything under control. But to him, it looks like they're wandering in circles. He finally asks Cray if they're heading toward the exit, but before Cry can even stammer out a response, Tino steps up confident as ever and points out that this path definitely doesn't lead to the exit. She has a rough idea of the den's layout from a map she saw, and while they're heading in the wrong direction, she assumes Cray must have some deeper plan. Ruta, of course, agrees but wishes Cray would at least tell them where they're going, but Cray is still silent. Eventually, they come across a fork in the road, and Cray, still winging it, randomly picks a path. To everyone's shock, he miraculously leads them straight to the injured hunters they were sent to rescue. Cray naturally has no idea how he managed this, but since the others are already moving to help, he plays along. Watching them tend to the injured, Cray is genuinely amazed that Tino noticed them, because he sure as hell didn't. The leader of the injured group, Rudolph, thanks Tino for saving them. But in typical Tino fashion, she gives all the credit to Cray, saying they never would have made it without him. Cray, feeling the pressure, tries to explain that he was just guessing the whole time and doesn't deserve any praise, but no one believes him for a second, and they just think he's being modest. Meanwhile, Ruta is busy handing out potions to help the hunters recover, but they're still losing energy fast because they haven't eaten in ages. That's when Cray remembers the one smart thing he did, bringing along his magic chocolate bag. With a near-infinite supply of chocolate inside, he figures it's the perfect solution for now. Rick then turns to Rudolph, saying he's glad Rudolph made it out alive because when he first heard that a level 5 party had gone missing in this dungeon, he feared the worst, but Rudolph grimly replies that they barely survived. Gilbert is skeptical and finds it hard to believe. Sure, the wolves were tough, but there's no way a level 5 party should be overwhelmed by monsters like that. But Rudolph wasn't talking about the wolves, rather the real threat was something far worse, a small phantom covered in bones that completely wiped out their party. Whatever that thing is, it's the pure embodiment of a grudge. It has full control over the vault, likely the curse of the silver moon that haunts this place. It embodies the resentment of every monster slain here, and over time his power grew until it became a true nightmare. Rudolph and his crew are no amateurs. They're some of the strongest around. Yet every single one of them was helpless against this beast. In fact, Rudolph would go so far as to compare the Phantom to Thousand Swords, a member of Grieving Souls and widely recognized as the most powerful swordsman in the capital. Thousand Swords is a prodigy who's mastered every orthodox technique only to invent more on top of them. This guy can take down enemies by the dozen, and he does it all with a wooden sword. Luke isn't someone to take lightly either, so Cray feels like it's a bit of an exaggeration to compare a Phantom to him. If something like that really existed, Luke would have hunted it down by now. Still, considering his Phantom completely wiped out a level 5 party, Cray isn't exactly confident that Tino and her group can handle it. In fact, he's seriously regretting not dumping this whole job on Ark instead, so he wouldn't have to deal with this mess. Rudolph continues explaining that the monster was toying with them during their last encounter. It didn't kill them immediately, but there's no doubt in his mind that if they run into it again, it won't be so merciful next time and it'll finish them off for good. Ruda then turns to Cry, asking what they should do next, but inside, Cry is internally losing it because he wasn't remotely prepared for this kind of situation. He stares off into space for a moment, panicking before finally coming up with something. He then tells Ruda they need to focus on getting the injured to safety and that escaping the vault is the priority. On top of that, since this was originally Tino's mission, he tells her that she's in charge from here on out. Tino flusteredly insists she doesn't deserve to lead when someone as legendary as Cry is around. But Cray's not interested in leading because he just doesn't want the responsibility. Eventually, Tino reluctantly agrees to take the lead and echoes Cray's plan to head for the exit, and thanks to Cry healing her leg, they should make good time, but Cry reminds her not to run too fast as the injured won't be able to keep up. He mostly says this for his own benefit, knowing full well he's way too out of shape to keep up with Tino's full speed. As they navigate the vault, Tino announces that they're getting close to the exit, and so far they've been lucky because they haven't run into the deadly Phantom. But just in case, Rudolph steps up and promises to act as everyone's shield if the Phantom shows up, buying time for the others to escape. Tino quickly reassures him that won't be necessary because she's confident everyone will make it out as long as Cry is with them. Cry, however, is not feeling the same level of confidence. In fact, he's already mentally preparing to grab Tino and ditch the rest if that Phantom appears. Still, for now he tries to stay optimistic, because he's got 5 safety rings left, so at the very least he can survive for a while if a fight breaks out. But that's about it because his shot rings don't work, and he lost the only sword relic he had while flying over here, so staying optimistic is a bit of a struggle right now. Just then, everyone feels something ominous approaching and they all snap into battle stance. Cry steps in front of Tino, determined to protect her. He's got no attack relics, but he's fully prepared to throw himself at whatever's coming, even if it means launching himself like a human missile with his wingsuit. The atmosphere shifts as the Phantom closes in, and everyone is paralyzed with fear because they can already tell they don't stand a chance against this thing. But Tino's terror intensifies when she spots something even more terrifying behind the Phantom, and an overwhelming sense of doom washes over her. So she starts begging Cray for help. Meanwhile, Cray recognizes the second figure, but is more confused than scared, having no idea why she would show up here. Suddenly, the second figure flash steps in and obliterates the Phantom with a single kick. After witnessing that level of power, there's no doubt in Cray's mind it's Liz. She casually walks up to Cray and, just to make sure, asks if it was okay that she kicked the Phantom into the wall, admitting she has no clue what's going on. But Cray, still stunned, tells her she has nothing to worry about. Liz then relieved and mentions that on her way over, she found one of Cray's sword relics lying on the ground. Ruda and Greg instantly recognize who Liz is, but Rudolph has never heard of her. Liz's eyes narrow because she can't believe there are hunters who don't know about grieving souls. She was already on edge, having sprinted home to see Cray, only to be told he had gone to this vault. Initially, she thought Cray was just being overly cautious, certain that Tino could handle this mission on her own. So if you can imagine her disappointment when she shows up and sees that Tino is failing miserably at managing what should have been a minor vault. Gilbert, trying to defend Tino, pipes up to say that she didn't do anything wrong, but Liz isn't having it, and without a second thought, she kicks him into the wall, leaving him nearly dead from the hit. With no more distractions, Liz turns her fury back on Tino, berating her for being such an incompetent weakling after all the training she's been through. Tino then starts begging for forgiveness, and Cray can barely watch because Liz is really tearing into her. As Liz continues yelling, the Phantom begins to recover from that brutal kick, and both Greg and Ruda are frantically pouring healing potions on Gilbert, trying to keep him alive after the hit he took. Not wanting Tino to end up in the same situation, Cray steps in attempting to calm Liz down. He reminds her that Tino doesn't deserve this anger because he sent her to rescue the hunters, and she actually did complete her mission, so calling her incompetent isn't fair, especially considering how well she handled everything. As soon as Liz hears Cry say this, her fury melts away as she turns to him and asks if Tino really did a good job. Cry reassures her, telling her that Tino truly impressed him. While he's at it, he also takes the opportunity to congratulate Liz for finally learning to hold back with her attacks. Liz, now beaming from the praise, admits that she still doesn't fully understand the point of going easy, but since Cry wouldn't stop nagging, she eventually learned to pull her punches. Cry is glad she listened, though he does point out that she might need a bit more practice. After all, Gilbert is in critical condition from her so-called warning shot. Tino apologizes again for the trouble she's caused, but Liz, now calm, reassures her. She tells Tino she's got real potential, but she'll have to work twice as hard to make up for her lack of raw strength. Meanwhile, the Phantom has regrouped with one of the wolf bosses and is preparing to attack again. The rest of the group braces for the worst, but Liz just looks annoyed. The monster has the audacity to pull out a machine gun, as if that's supposed to intimidate her. She casually picks up her mask, and as the wolf opens fire, Liz doesn't even flinch. The bullets move so slowly, they might as well be in slow motion. And by the time the gun runs out of ammo, Liz is still standing there, completely unharmed. Not only that, but she's casually holding some of the bullets in her hand. And she's even had the time to arrange the rest into a neat little pattern. Liz might have cooled down earlier, but finding out that Tino was struggling against a monster with a gun has her even more furious than before. Liz was dodging bullets by the time she was 10 years old, so having a monster-pointed gun at her is nothing short of an insult. She's about to show just how laughable that is. With a graceful backflip into the air, she comes down with a devastating kick, slicing straight through the giant wolf and splitting it in half, causing it to explode. For Liz, this wasn't hard at all, so she can't understand why Tino didn't just do the same thing ages ago. As Liz continues lecturing, the Phantom draws its sword and charges at her, but Liz unfazedly believes this should have been another easy win for Tino. So with nothing more than 2 fingers, she catches the Phantom's sword mid-strike, knees it into the air, and unleashes a barrage of punches, all while berating Tino for being too weak to handle something this pathetic on her own. Tino breaks down in tears and Cray feels bad for her, but honestly, this is par for the course with Liz's tough love training methods. After all, Liz is the fastest hunter in the world, and her blinding speed has earned her the nickname Stifled Shadow. Then once everything calms down, Tino, Greg, Ruta, and Gilbert regroup at the guild. Gilbert announces that he wants to give up his flame sword because he's realized he's been relying on it way too much, and now plans to train his body from scratch until he can catch bullets like Liz. The others don't believe for a second that he'll ever manage it, but if he's serious about wanting to be like Liz, Tino figures he should know something about the masks they all wear. Everyone assumes Cray planned it this way to sharpen his party's skills, but the truth is when Cray ordered the masks for grieving souls 6 years ago, he forgot to include eye holes. So yeah, everyone in the party has basically been fighting blind this entire time. Back in the present, we find Cray searching for Citri's slime, but it's nowhere to be found, so he frustratedly decides to just forget about it for now. Though that's easier said than done because his mind drifts back to a year ago when Citri Smart, an eccentric alchemist with a certification level of 2, left the slime in his care, convinced it would be safe with him. Citri is famous as the brains behind the Grievers and a member of the Empire's academic institution, is known for her brilliance and unconventional ways. In the past, she was even hailed as the most outstanding alchemist, with the moniker Unfettered. Cray reflects that her genius has often led him into sticky and dangerous situations just like this one, and he remembers naming the slime Citri's Slime. He then remembers how they used to mess around with slimes as kids, and one time when he tried to let the slime out for fun, Citri stopped him casually, warning that it was a little dangerous and could possibly destroy the entire capital. Cray understandably thought that was more than just a little dangerous, and then Citri asked him to be extremely careful with the slime, and he agreed. Fast forward to the present, and he's still trying to track down the slime, even though part of him would love to just forget it ever existed. With no luck finding it, he gets exhausted and sits on his bed, attempting to think through the situation calmly. He recalls opening the capsule in the White Wolf's den, only to find it empty. He's sure he kept the slime locked up safely, so how could it possibly have escaped? Maybe, just maybe, this is some elaborate prank by Citri, and he tries to laugh it off. But deep down, he knows he just doesn't want to deal with this nightmare anymore. Meanwhile, in the White Wolf's den, a group of adventurers is battling monsters that are way stronger than expected. One of the women remarks that this request is turning out to be tougher than they thought. Her companion agrees, but stresses the importance of investigating the treasure vault is crucial to the country. He recalls that Thousand Tricks is also involved, which only confirms their suspicion. Something big is definitely happening here. Meanwhile, at headquarters, we find Cray looking exhausted from lack of sleep. As he stumbles around, he runs into Eva, who informs him that they've been contacted by the association regarding the White Wolf's den. Cray, in his typical fashion, casually tells her to pass it on to Tino, since she was the leader of that mission. Eva, wanting to handle it herself but unable to, explains that Tino is busy training with Liz. Cry, clearly not in the mood, changes the subject, asking Eva if there's been any movement in the imperial capital. Eva, understandably confused, asks what kind of movement he means. Cry, shrugging it off, says it's probably nothing and that it's good if nothing's going on. Eva, now suspicious, says she'll look into it anyway, thinking Cry is hinting at something deeper, but Cry brushes it off, telling her it's just his imagination. He then decides to go check on Tino instead, and Eva informs him she's training on the second basement level. As Cry walks off, Eva remains convinced that Cray's comment wasn't as innocent as he made it seem. She knows he's had a freakish ability to predict natural disasters like earthquakes and treasure vault abnormalities, but she's unaware that Cray's predictions may have been because he caused some of those disasters himself. Cut to Cry arriving at the second basement level. A bunch of hunters are gathered outside the training room, clearly waiting for their turn. Among them is Sven Anger, a level 6 hunter, who immediately asks Cry to put an end to Liz's madness. Apparently, Liz has taken over the training grounds and no one else can use them. Cry jokingly replies that monster hunting isn't really his thing, but Sven desperately tells him that he's the only one who can stop her right now because Ansem and Lucia are out on a mission right now. Sven can't wrap his head around why Liz even came back on her own, to which Cry nonchalantly explains that she disarmed all the traps, made it to the boss room, got bored, and came back. Sven is floored, completely unable to believe Liz got bored in a level 8 treasure vault, muttering in disbelief about what kind of nerves the Grievers must have. But he quickly snaps back to the present, urgently warning Cray that if they don't stop Liz soon, Tino's going to die. But Cray, in his usual laid-back style, doesn't believe anything serious is going down, thinking humans don't just drop dead that easily. But the moment he swings the door open, he spots Tino flat on the floor, completely unresponsive. Liz standing over her, mocks her to get up, questioning if that's all she's got. When Tino still doesn't move, Liz decides to end it, but Cry steps in and stops her. She turns to him a bit annoyed and asks what the problem is because she's in the middle of training Tino, and she's baffled by how weak she is, claiming she herself was way stronger at that age. Cry knows Liz is fired up, but he gently tells her that Tino has reached her limit and it's time to call it a day, and Liz surprisingly agrees without a fuss. But then from behind, Tino grabs Liz's foot, gasping that she can still keep going, driven by her determination to keep fighting with Cry watching. And Liz amusedly comments that Cry is incredible for pushing Tino to get up like that, and with a smirk, she resumes the training session with Tino. Cry then leaves the room, apologizing to the hunters waiting outside, explaining that Liz isn't going to listen to reason when she's in that kind of mood. Sven then shrugs and says it can't be helped, remarking how tough Cray must be on Tino, seeing how hard he's pushing her. Cry tries to deny it, but Sven waves him off, uninterested in the explanation, so Cry lets it slide and sits down with Sven to talk. Sven then fills Cry in on the latest bad news. The Northern Road has been closed off due to the appearance of multiple phantoms, and the situation is still under investigation. And to make matters worse, the knights who went to check things out were killed. Cry remembers hearing about phantoms from the White Wolf's den attacking a traveler and thinks something's definitely off with that treasure vault, so he wonders if this is why Gark called for him. His thoughts then drift to Ark, wishing he were around to handle this mess because everything always seemed to go smoother with Ark in charge, so eventually Cray decides to buy some time until Ark returns. Noticing how calm Cry looks, Sven remarks on how relaxed he seems despite the chaos. Cry, internally shrugging, thinks it's only because this whole mess isn't really his problem. He then figures if he sends the obsidian cross over to Gark, then it's not on him, so he casually suggests to Sven and his party that they take on a quest for the association, since they can't use the training room anyway. And he also adds that while they're at it, they should let Gark know he's busy and can't answer the summons. Cray then takes off, and Sven's party member mutters that he has no clue what's going on in Cray's head. He figures Cray's just living the easy life, lounging around the clan while everyone else is out busting their backs exploring treasure vaults. Sven, clearly tired of the new guy's whining, explains that Cray's always been like this, and it's just how the clan operates. He adds that while it might not make sense to the newcomer now, Cray is a freaking monster beneath that carefree attitude. So Sven warns his clueless party mate to stop taking things at face value and pay closer attention to what Cry says, because there's always more going on under the surface, and the new guy finally gets the message. Meanwhile, Gark is trying to wrap his head around the fact that nothing's changed at the White Wolf's den or the surrounding areas, so he wonders what the hell went sideways in that treasure vault. He's pretty sure it's something man-made and figures he needs to talk to Cry about it. But before he can get ahead of himself, his assistant Kana reminds him that the obsidian cross had already sent Cray's busy and can't show up. Gark, not buying it, says he'll just have to go see Cry himself, convinced that Cray's got some intel. Kana then confusedly asks why Gark thinks so, and Gark points out that Cry hasn't been hitting up treasure vaults much lately, but for some reason, he made a special trip to this one, so that alone screams that something's off. Elsewhere in some shady facility, a group of researchers is in full panic mode. Their lead scientist can't believe a high-level hunter got involved. He knows it's only a matter of time before the association figures out what they're up to, but worse yet, they realize that Thousand Tricks is way more dangerous than they'd heard. Turns out, this sketchy group calls themselves the Magical Society of Akashic Tower, and they're the ones pulling the strings behind all the weird stuff going on lately. They complain that hunters are relentless, and they know the hunters won't back off until they uncover the cause of the abnormalities. The leader, trying to calm the crew, explains that their end game is to develop a way to create treasure vaults at will, and once their research pans out, they'll be able to generate endless treasure vaults. Then one of the underlings suggests they ditch the facility for now, baffled that their teammate Sophia is off on vacation while everything's falling apart. The leader, however, isn't fazed because he was the one who approved her time off, and he reassures them that she checked in with a communication stone saying she'll be back soon. And he's confident that the mess will be sorted once Sophia returns, so he orders the team to focus on gathering intel in the meantime. Later, we see Cry stuck in a nightmare about Citri's slime wrecking the capital, and he wakes up screaming like he's being chased by death itself. Relieved that it was just a nightmare, he glances over to find Liz lying next to him, having also woken up from his outburst. Apparently, she has a habit of sneaking into his bed, which explains why he was feeling so hot because Liz's body is always hot for some reason. She then asks if Cry is free today, hoping to spend the day with him. Cry gets confused and wonders if she isn't supposed to be training Tino or herself, but Liz shrugs it off saying she's taking a break. Cry agrees, easily distracted from the nightmare he just had. Later, Gark shows up at the Footprints headquarters looking for Cray, but sees that Cray and Liz are about to head out. As he tries to stop them, Liz snaps, telling him that Cray's busy today. Gark gets surprised and mentions how he specifically asked them to report to him anytime they clear a vault above level 7. But Liz isn't having any of it, telling him to shut up and accusing the group of relying too much on Cray, insisting they should learn to clean up their own damn mess. Her irritation peaks, and she kicks Gark in frustration for ruining her plans with Cry. As Gark and Liz start bickering like children, Cray takes the opportunity to slip away and talk privately with Kana. She updates him, saying there's no problem with the veins, and asks if he noticed anything odd at the White Wolf's den. Cry admits he didn't, but accidentally reveals he's more worried about something else. When Kana presses for details, he brushes her off, saying he can't tell her because someone might overhear. His mind races back to the slime, a secret he isn't ready to share. Instead, he advises her to ask Ark for help, thinking Ark might be the right person to handle this. Meanwhile, Liz and Gark are still at each other's throats, with Liz mocking Gark for getting old and weak, which pushes him over the edge, making him fight seriously. Cry then explains that Gark used to be a level 7 hunter in steps, and before those two idiots wrecked the whole damn building. He tells Gark he's already finished talking things over with Kana, but of course Gark's too stubborn to let it go. Just as he's about to lose it again, he realizes Liz has already slipped away and is standing beside Cray. Gark gets confused as hell and wonders when she managed that, and finally he calms down, but he grumbles that he probably needs to get his sorry ass back into shape and then leaves with Kana. Not long after Io walks in, devastated to find the building trashed. Later, Liz and Cray are on their date, and Liz, still stuck on the earlier fight, says Gark's getting weaker. Cray disagrees, telling her it's ridiculous to compare others to herself. She laughs it off, saying he wouldn't last 2 seconds in the level 8 treasure vault she just explored with his abilities. That hits Cray, and he remembers the phantoms that were insanely strong. He starts wondering how they stacked up against the boss of the White Wolf's den, but Liz casually says she can't even remember facing a boss in that vault. That's when it dawns on Cray. The boss wasn't even worth remembering to her. Cray's thoughts then drift to Citri and the others still inside that level 8 vault, and he really hopes they hurry back because he's going to need Citri to do something before that slime stirs up a whole heap of trouble. Liz then notices that he seems down, and out of nowhere he asks what she'd do if Zabrudia was ever destroyed, but Liz, with her usual upbeat attitude, says she'd run away with him. But this time she wants them to go to a tropical country, since she's never seen the ocean, and Cray thinks she's almost annoyingly optimistic. Then out of the blue, Liz snatches up a guy who was watching them. Cray asks her to let him go, and as soon as she does, the man bolts. Liz then wonders if he let the guy escape on purpose, and she can't believe how good his acting is, but Cray's left completely clueless about what she's even talking about. Meanwhile, the man is holed up in his hideout, baffled by how Liz noticed him. He's also scratching his head over why Cray let him go and wonders just how much they already know. Elsewhere, a young woman approaches Noctis Cochlear, the leader of the shady researchers we saw earlier. She then introduces herself as Sophia Black and asks to become his disciple, saying she's deeply interested in his work. Impressed by her determination, Noctis agrees to take her under his wing. The story then shifts to a flashback where we see Gark fuming as the Obsidian Cross informs him that yet again Cray is too busy to meet. Gark mutters that he has a mountain of questions for Cray, but it's always the same lame excuse. He recalls that the Obsidian Cross arrived here with a mission and wonders if he can truly rely on them. They assure him he can. So Gark instructs them to investigate the White Wolf's den. In the present, we find the Obsidian Cross locked in battle with monsters in the White Wolf's den. While Sten reflects that, as usual, everything seems to be playing right into Cray's hands. The scene then shifts to Cry strolling through the slums with Liz, who's delighted to think they're on a date. Cry quickly clarifies that this is not a date and notes that they're in the most dangerous area of the Imperial Palace, where the locals are visibly rattled to see Liz there. Liz then curiously asks if Cray's looking for something, and Cray admits he is. According to Eva's intel, people have started vanishing in the area, and it's a creepy but not unheard of occurrence in a place like this. But if a Citri slime is involved, it's no joke. He also recalls a new ice cream shop recently opened in the area and decides to check it out while they're there. He then suggests they head to the shop, and Liz clings happily to his arm as they walk. Meanwhile, the man Liz had apprehended earlier spies on them from a nearby building, and he wonders why on earth they're here and if Cry somehow let him go on purpose to be tracked, but he's certain no one had followed him. He's confident that no one could guess their new ice cream shop is actually a research base and is baffled at how Thousand Tricks figured this out. He hurriedly decides to close up shop just as Sophia arrives. He's relieved to see her. When Cray and Liz reach the shop, they find it locked. Liz gets frustrated and tries to break down the door, but Cray stops her, suggesting they may just be closed for the day. Liz insists it was open moments ago because she can still smell the sweetness in the air. Inside, the man listens to their conversation, sweating nervously, but then feels a wave of relief when he realizes Cray and Liz are giving up and walking away. Back at the clan, Cray is feeling frustrated after coming up empty-handed despite all his investigating. He wonders where on earth Citri's slime could have vanished to and asks Liz when Citri is expected back from the Night Palace. Liz admits she doesn't know, but says she'd gladly help Cry herself. Cry, however, explains he needs someone with expertise in magical creatures, a subject Liz knows she can't help with. She adds that Citri might take a while since she hauled along a ton of equipment for this raid, and Cray, trying to be patient, reassures himself that Citri will return soon enough. Eva arrives then, reporting to Cry on the members she's selected to investigate the White Wolf's den. She explains that since Ark is unavailable, she's put together a different team. Cry lets her handle it, thinking that while this mission is escalating, it's not his problem since he won't be joining them. The scene then shifts to Akashic Tower headquarters, where the leader is informed that Thousand Tricks has discovered one of their hidden bases. The members of the society wonder if Cray's information network has outmatched their own, and the man from earlier is baffled as to why Cray would just leave their base alone after discovering it, and he can't wrap his head around what that guy is thinking. Another member then tries to reassure him, but they're all uncertain about Cray's intentions. The leader then asks Sophia for her opinion, and she suggests they confront the hunters head-on. Others argue that they stand no chance, but Sophia dismisses their doubts. She points out that while they may be an illegal society, that doesn't mean they have to roll over for anyone. She insists this is the perfect opportunity to test the defense system she designed, and adds that if they wipe out these hunters, there won't be anyone left to spread information about them. The leader agrees with her, so he hands the command over to Sophia and leaves her to handle the situation. The scene then shifts to Tino in the bath, marveling at her own skin because there's not a single scratch on her body, even after the hell training her master put her through. She realizes her master must have dunked her in a potion bath after beating her senseless, and she's just glad to still be breathing. Afterwards, Tino heads over to the clan building and is shocked to find a crowd of people gathered there. She then asks one of the members what's going on, and he explains that they're teaming up with the association to investigate the White Wolf's den, and she's surprised they're deploying this many people. The member then adds that Cray had initially wanted to send Ark, but since he's unavailable, all these folks are standing in as replacements. Still, he admits that only the Grievers can truly fill Ark's shoes. Tino then starts wondering what must have happened in that treasure vault since her last visit to trigger this kind of response, and then we see that even Cray looks stunned at the turnout. Ava steps in and tells Cray that this is the team they discussed yesterday, but Cray hesitates and feels uncertain about sending so many people to a former level 3 treasure vault. He figures they'd be fine with even half this number, but the hunters get spooked at the idea. They plead with him to reconsider, worried that the mission was originally meant for Ark. Cray shrugs, thinking the mission isn't all that tough, and he had only wanted Ark for peace of mind. Eva then tries to settle everyone down, saying that Cray may have something to say to them. Cray then declares that half the crew should be more than enough for what used to be a level 3 vault, Still, the hunters look uneasy, so he finally agrees to send the entire team. Just then, Liz bursts in, taunting the cowards and insisting that she and Tino can handle the mission alone. Cry isn't sure if he can leave Tino with her on their own because he knows how much Tino has already suffered under Liz's hard-handed training, so he insists the others can handle it and brushes Liz's offer aside. Eva then turns to Cry, asking him to lead the mission, but Cry grimaces, trying to pass off the leadership to Sven, but Eva reminds him that Sven's already inside the vault. Cry thinks fast, agreeing to command the mission but mentioning that he's busy and will join them later, so until then he names Sven as their acting leader. Eva accepts, and Cry, satisfied with his plan, decides he'll take his time joining, aiming to show up just as the mission wraps up. Meanwhile, Sven and his party battle their way through monsters in the White Wolf's den, taking down every creature they encounter. Sven notes that while the monsters are strong, nothing here seems especially out of the ordinary, but they decide to press forward anyway. Back at the clan, Liz stews over why she's been left behind, pestering Cry to let her go with the others, but Cray declines, claiming he has a different task lined up for her. Liz lights up at this, agreeing to stay put, while Cray smirks to himself because he only said that to keep her from charging off to the treasure vault on her own. One of the hunters then asks Cray if there's anything specific they should watch out for on this quest. Cry mentions a slime, and that catches the hunter off guard because slime shouldn't be in a high-level treasure vault. But Cray insists they keep an eye out anyway, cautioning that it may not be just any ordinary slime, and with that the hunters set off. The scene then shifts to the Akashic Tower members, who are in a full-on panic. They're floored by the massive scale of the hunter's assault, and the leader fumes, calling it a shameless attack. He grumbles that they're being blocked from seeking the truth and declares that they should crush these intruders, but one member mentions their opponent is none other than Thousand Tricks, and warns that if he brings in the entire Grieving Souls crew, it could spell trouble. Sophia, however, remains unfazed. She points out that while Grieving Souls is indeed one of the capital's top parties, she's already built a defense system that will counter their attacks. She notes that only 3 members of Grieving Souls are currently in the capital, and they are Cray, Liz, and Citri. The member from earlier, Flick, skeptically demands to know how she's so certain of this, and Sophia smugly responds that her information network is leagues better than his, which ticks him off. She then adds that they can easily handle Stifled Shadow by preparing against physical attacks, and notes that Thousand Tricks won't be able to operate at full strength without a party member to guide him. The leader suspects that Citri might be the real problem here, but Sophia reassures him that the defense system she's built around their stronghold is specifically designed to block an alchemist's magic techniques, making it impossible to breach. She then declares that Citri is her nemesis, and she's fully prepared to crush her once and for all. Sophia also explains that Citri has been poking around this research ever since she caught wind of the leader's thesis, and she firmly believes someone like Citri has no right to meddle in his work. Then, with fierce conviction, she asks for permission to use every resource they've developed to handle the oncoming threat, and the leader grants it without hesitation. He commands everyone to follow Sophia's orders as if they were his own, though Flick doesn't look thrilled by this decision. The scene then shifts to Sven and his crew, still in the thick of their investigation. Sven's party members start grumbling, questioning why they're even on this quest, so Sven reminds them that they had no choice. It was a direct order from Gark. Henrik mutters that it feels like they're just here to clean up Cray's mess, and Sven doesn't deny it, but he adds that someday, Henrik might finally understand just how extraordinary Cray really is. Just then, Sven gets a message over his communicator, and realizing the situation outside has shifted, so he tells Henrik to sound the whistle. Henrik does, and every party in the treasure vault begins to head outside at the signal. Once outside, a party member confronts the Obsidian Cross, demanding to know why they use the emergency signal when there's clearly nothing out of the ordinary. Sven calmly agrees but explains that Cray advised them to watch out for slimes, but the guy can't believe it, scoffing that Cray would issue such an order from his comfortable desk back in the capital. And after all, slimes are weak creatures, hardly worth a fuss, but Sven calmly replies that he sounded the whistle out of concern for everyone, adding that it won't hurt to wait for reinforcements before pressing on. The team still can't wrap their heads around the idea of slimes appearing in a high-level treasure vault. Sven then brings up an odd story, recalling how once Cray invited them to a flower viewing party, but insisted they all bring their weapons since it was outside the city. The rude guy rolls his eyes, wondering why Sven's rambling about a flower viewing trip now. Sven explains that the place they visited is now a treasure vault, and he asks if they've ever actually seen a vault appear because it's like hell bursting open right on Earth. The guy realizes Sven's talking about the infamous Prism Garden, as Sven adds that Thousand Tricks has a way of foreseeing these things. He points out that he paid a hefty price for the communication stone just to get the intel faster from Cray because any information from him is very valuable. Back at the clan building, Liz eagerly asks Cray when they're heading out, excited to fight in front of him since she didn't get to show her true power last time. Cray considers that he'd intended to join at the last possible moment but realizes now that timing it right might be tricky. Just then, Citri arrives and Liz is surprised to see her back so soon, but Citri retorts that she didn't want to hear it from someone who returned even earlier than she did. Citri adds that she hurried back thinking Cray might need her help and shares her unease, urging Cray to strike their enemies down now before they get stronger. Then she pulls him aside to talk privately. Meanwhile, Gark is seen gearing up to enter the White Wolf's den himself. Kana tries to stop him, reminding him he's retired, but he waves her off, saying he can't let Liz show him up. Kana just sighs, thinking that he may be an adult, but he's as childish as ever. And just then, Citri arrives to make a request of Gark. The story then shifts to the past, showing Citri and Cray as kids sitting together. Citri told Cray she wanted to make up for what others were lacking, believing that if she could, everyone could truly enjoy being hunters. She admitted she wasn't very strong, prompting Cray to suggest she find a role that suited her. He encouraged her to consider becoming an alchemist, a role where her talents could shine. In the present, before heading off to see Gark, Citri stops by Cray's room. She casually mentions that her slime creation has undergone significant improvements, now boasting a remarkable ability to adapt and evolve. However, she admits it's still a failed product. Cray puzzledly asks what she means, but Citri reassures him the slime won't harm either of them. Relieved to hear this, Cray relaxes until he realizes she didn't say the same about anyone else, while Citri wonders how the slime managed to escape its supposedly secure safe. She speculates it must have opened the safe and fled after breaking out its capsule. Cray tries to interrupt her spiral of thoughts to address her earlier point, but he can't get a word in edgewise. Citri then heads to the bathroom, theorizing that since it's a slime, it might have instinctively sought out water and escaped through the bathroom drain. Hearing this, Cray's mind races with the horrifying possibility that a dangerous slime capable of wiping out the capital could now be roaming through the pipes. The thought fills him with dread, but Citri brushes off his concerns and confidently tells him to leave everything to her. The scene then shifts to the White Wolf's den, where Cray's reinforcements have already arrived. One of them approaches Sven, asking about the situation. Sven replies that nothing has happened so far and asks if there's anyone to take command, but the guy informs him that Cray specifically asked Sven to lead. Sven isn't surprised, thinking it's typical of Cray to dodge responsibility, but he finds it odd that Liz isn't present either. The guy explains that Liz wanted to join, but Cray took her and Tino along for another task, so Sven becomes relieved and glad that Stifled Shadow isn't here, knowing there would have been no way to cooperate with her in the mix. He then gathers everyone for a strategy meeting, and once the group is assembled, Sven asks if anyone has direct experience fighting slime. No one raises their hand, dismissing slimes as insignificant opponents. One of them jokes about accidentally stomping a slime to death before, but Sven presses them by asking if they brought anything special to deal with slimes. The group assumes standard weapons like swords, hammers, or magic will suffice since slimes are weak to almost everything. The earlier guy chimes in, saying people think of slimes as harmless creatures. Sven asks if Cray provided more details, but the man admits all Cray said was that this wasn't a normal slime, so Sven gets annoyed and grumbles about Cray's habit of withholding critical information. The loudmouth of the group named Jean scoffs and calls everyone cowards for fearing a mere slime. The Footprints crew exchange pitying looks, making Jane furious as he accuses them of mocking him. Sven bluntly tells Jane that everyone expects him to be the first victim, hoping his death at least won't be meaningless. Jane then gets fuming and storms off, muttering that these people are insane for blindly trusting someone who didn't even bother to show up in person. Amidst the tense atmosphere, a girl among the hunters raises her hand. Introducing herself as Talia Widman the alchemist, she surprises everyone since no one knew they had another alchemist besides Citri. Talia explains that she recently worked in the lab with Citri in researching slimes. Sven then eagerly asks if she knows any weaknesses, and Talia reveals a capsule, explaining it's a drug she and Citri developed to kill slimes, but she hesitates and admits she isn't confident it will work against the abnormal slimes they're about to face. The scene then shifts to the hideout of the Akashic Tower, where the leader Noctis communicates with his disciple using a magical stone. She confidently assures her master that defeat is not an option, and she explains that they are facing fewer than 100 hunters, and that their forces and strategies are more than enough to crush them. Noctis then asks her what her first move will be, and as she lays out her plan, the perspective shifts to the area outside the White Wolf's den. Sven gathers his team and outlines the strategy, and first they'll secure the interior of the den. He then stresses the importance of caution and instructs them to use whistles for communication. A whistle is to be sounded immediately in case of any discovery or emergency, and adds that those not assigned to suppression duties will focus on rescue operations. With the plan clear, they set off on the mission, determined to prove to their clan master that this ordeal is no big deal for them. By evening, the team had scoured the area and found little of note, aside from some wolf knights in the treasure vault. Nothing unusual seems to be happening, and doubts begin to creep in. They wonder if Cry might have been wrong about the whole situation and even consider themselves lucky that nothing disastrous has unfolded. Jean, as always, arrives to stir the pot and mocks them for worrying unnecessarily and gripes that the mission could have been finished already if they weren't blindly following their idiot leader. Sven brushes off his complaints, telling him they can address grievances later. Jean annoyedly tries to storm off, but Sven warns him not to wander alone. Jean dismisses this, claiming he just needs to take a leak. Henrik, observing the exchange, quietly tells Sven that while he may not fully understand Cray, he chooses to trust him, and Sven hopes he can live up to that trust. As night falls, Jean is still out in the forest grumbling to himself while taking his sweet time, muttering under his breath about how the Obsidian Cross is full of cowards. He gripes that while he respects someone like Ark Roden, he can't stomach the idea of some capital desk jockey claiming to predict events out here in the wild. His grumbling is cut short when he hears strange noises coming from the forest, so he curiously ventures into the woods and stumbles upon a chained-up wolf knight. Nearby the wolf, two shady figures are discussing Sophia, lamenting how she's become Noctis's favorite despite lacking both combat skills and magical talent. The duo then gears up to do something sketchy. They're about to embed mana material enchantment into the wolf knight. But before they can act, Jean charges in with his sword. He makes quick work of both, knocking them down with ease. But as he's roughing one up demanding answers, the other sneaks in and injects the mana material into the wolf knight. What happens next is straight out of a nightmare. The wolf knight starts morphing into a slime-like creature, breaking free from its chains. One of the shady guys smirks and tells Jean this thing is now a demonized monster, hungry for massive amounts of mana material. Realizing just how bad things are, Jean blows his whistle. Back at the camp, Sven hears the whistle and immediately orders his subordinates to recall everyone inside the labyrinth and sends the hunters rushing toward the source of the whistle. Upon arriving, Sven questions one of Jean's teammates about his whereabouts, and to Sven's surprise, Jean still hasn't returned. They soon find him staggering out of the forest, missing one of his hands. Bloodied and shaken, Jean croaks that Thousand Tricks was right and there's a slime in the forest. The hunters then spot the creature, and Talia notes with a mix of horror and fascination that she's never encountered a slime like this before. Sten then quickly takes command, ordering the mages to focus on distracting the massive monster and declares that the creature must be stopped here and now. Sten then loses an arrow at it, but the shot simply bounces off the slime's surface. The mages follow up with a barrage of magical attacks, but even their combined efforts fail to leave so much as a scratch on the creature. Meanwhile, Henrik patches up Jean's severed hand, while Jean spills to Sven about how some lunatics injected the wolf knight with some freaky concoction, turning it into this abomination. Sven then readies more arrows, muttering that this thing is far from a mere slime, but even after taking multiple arrows, the abomination seems completely unbothered, so Sven frustratedly can't wrap his head around how neither physical nor magical attacks have any effect. A hunter then nervously asks what they should do next, and Sven snarls that they can't just run away and leave this monstrosity roaming free. Then as the slime lashes out at the hunters, Sven orders them to focus on dodging its attacks, pointing out its sluggish movements. While they hold it all, he retrieves the drug Talia had shown him earlier, and one she claimed would make the slime self-destruct upon contact. Stud manages to distract the slime, leading it on a chase before dropping the drug in its path. The moment the slime oozes over the drug, it detonates within the creature's body, but to their shock, it's still standing. Talia can't believe her drug failed, and Sven is fuming, certain that this thing can't possibly be a slime. A hunter then chimes in, reminding him that Cray did say it was a slime-like creature. Sven, frustrated with Cray's endless habit of withholding crucial details, wonders aloud just how many more times Cray plans to nearly get them all killed. Citri then arrives and announces that the slime is encased in a magical barrier. Sten then questions why she's even here, and Citri calmly explains that Cray sent her, knowing things could spiral out of control. Citri then elaborates that a massive amount of magical energy is swirling around the slime, and this energy is forming an intense force field capable of deflecting arrows, countering spells, and doing everything short of making coffee. She adds that even in a level 8 treasure vault, it wouldn't find a phantom this strong. Analyzing the slime further, Citri suddenly finds herself under attack. That's when it clicks. The slime is targeting her because she's absorbing the most mana in the area, so without missing a beat, she pulls out a capsule, hurling it toward the slime while yelling at Sven to shoot it. He follows through, and with a clean shot, the creature is obliterated. Sen then curiously asks what she threw at it, and Citri casually reveals it was anti-mana material. At that moment, Gark shows up, looking like he's ready to jump into the action, and sadly asks if it's over. Sen is thoroughly confused by his presence, so Citri explains that Gark gave her a lift to the scene, and adds that she has a solid hunch about what's really going on and who's pulling the strings behind this chaos. Back at the Akashic Tower hideout, Noctis is shocked that Citri managed to take down the demonized phantom so easily, so he figures she must have seen through the effects of the enchantment potion. Meanwhile, at the Hunter's camp, Citri spells to everyone that Noctis and his shady secret society, the Akashic Tower, are behind this entire mess, and she explains that they're experimenting with ways to manipulate treasure vaults at will. The city officials present are skeptical, pointing out that Noctis was banished from the capital ages ago, but Citri admits that she never expected them to believe her. That's precisely why she's been hunting Noctis solo. She adds that the phantom they fought earlier was just a side effect of his twisted experiments. Talia, trying to piece it together, asks if Citri's saying there's some kind of device underground. Citri confirms, explaining that it takes a massive setup to pull off what Noctis is attempting, and she also warns that they might even have battle preparations in place. She then suggests starting by interrogating the mage Jean captured, confident there are more monsters like the one they just fought waiting in the wings. The hunters are feeling confident, figuring they'll be fine as long as Citri has more anti-mana material, but Citri quickly shuts that down, admitting she doesn't have any more. Still, she reassures them, saying she'll analyze the monster to figure out a strategy, and with so many skilled hunters around, she's sure they can handle it, so she asks everyone to lend her their fighting power since she admits she's not physically strong herself. After she leaves, Henrik remarks that Citri's impressive for owning up to her weakness, but Sven with a smirk calls her a powerful weakling, and warns Henrik to be careful around her. Henrik confusedly asks what he means, so Sven explains that because Citri is aware of her weaknesses, she feels justified in doing whatever it takes to achieve her goals, and it's just her nature to use any means necessary. Meanwhile, at the clan, Liz is pestering Cry to head to the White Wolf's den with her. Cry, as usual, refuses, insisting on waiting for the right moment, but Liz, of course, isn't about to let up, continuing to needle him with relentless determination as if she likes it, while Tino embarrassedly watching the wild situation. The scene then shifts to a group inside the Akashic Tower hideout, debating Sophia's decision to send out the transmogrified phantoms one at a time. They argue it's a terrible strategy, practically inviting their monsters to be picked off one by one, so Flick scoffs and remarks that this is exactly what you'd expect from a scientist with zero battlefield experience. Then he frustratedly orders them to contact her through the communication stone, but when they tell him they've already tried but received no response, Flick can't believe it. He declares that if they're up against someone as cunning as 1,000 tricks, they need to give it their all. Taking matters into his own hands, he defies Sophia's orders and decides to unleash all the transmogrified monsters at once, determined to prove to the leader that she's not the only one pulling her weight. Meanwhile, the hunters surround the captured Akashic Tower members, and Gark is stunned by how a single injection could create such a monstrosity. Citri then wastes no time and starts interrogating the prisoners about their leader, Master Magus. She promises to guarantee their safety if they reveal their master's location, but when they refuse, this confirms her suspicion that they are disciples of Noctis. Citri then reveals she's been tracking the Akashic Tower for a long time and knows their secrets, and then she presses again for their leader's whereabouts, this time threatening to use a potion to loosen their tongues. However, city officials intervene, reminding her that the potion is illegal because it can force confessions but comes with dangerous side effects like erasing memories. Citri then argues that desperate times call for desperate measures, insisting that justice is worth the risk, but Gark then steps in and diffuses the tension before the argument escalates, and then reminds Citri that they have laws and can't treat prisoners however they please. Citri then smirks and claims it was all a joke and says the potion is just harmless colored water, and to prove her point, she drinks it. The potion is in fact dangerous, but she is already resistant to colored water, so it does not affect her. She then abruptly shifts focus and says that the time has run out, and then the forest starts to quake. They then step outside to investigate and spot transmogrified monster looming ahead. Sen wonders aloud how they're supposed to fight such a creature, and Citri explains that these phantoms can possess various magical barriers. She emphasizes the need to determine which elemental magic will break through it. Sen, stunned by her calm demeanor, notices the monster's color is unlike the others, so Citri speculates it might have a different origin. She then instructs the shield bearers to take the front lines but warns them to drop their shields immediately upon impact or risk losing their hands. The group balks at her grim directive, but before they can argue further, the monster strikes one of the shielded hunters, leaving his hand numbed from the blow. Citri then quickly commands the mages to attack. As their magic hits, she observes the monster's rotating force field, which spins clockwise and shifts across his body. Realizing the shield disintegrates Melee's strikes upon contact, she deduces that close combat is futile. Gark then questions if they should simply wait for the creature to exhaust its magic, but Citri dismisses the idea, estimating it has enough mana to sustain itself for at least an hour. This revelation helps Sven understand why Cry wanted Ark to handle the situation instead. As Citri begins strategizing a way to bring the creature down, another similar monster appears nearby. While the group panics at this new threat, Citri surprises them by smiling, and then she orders everyone to retreat. Confused but obedient, they fall back, only to witness the monsters turning on each other. Citri then chuckles and admits that she hadn't expected the Akashic Tower's creations to be this flawed, and then she explains that these monsters are programmed to attack the entity with the highest mana material nearby, and since their own kind contains the most mana on this battlefield, they've started battling each other. The chaos escalates as a third monster emerges, quickly joining the fray. More creatures soon rise, transforming the area into a violent melee. Sven, watching the unfolding madness, isn't sure whether to feel relieved or cursed. Meanwhile, the captured Akashic Tower members gape in horror, realizing their creation's critical flaw. Talia then questions why the Akashic Tower didn't deploy these monsters one at a time, and upon hearing her voice, the prisoners exchange uneasy glances, wondering if she might be Sophia. Meanwhile, Master Magus scolds Flick and his cronies for their reckless actions, reminding them that he explicitly instructed them to treat Sophia's words as his own. Their carelessness has now depleted the entire supply of transmogrification potion, so Flick and the others apologize profusely, claiming they never anticipated such consequences. On the other end of a communication stone, Sophia chimes in to clarify that her instructions weren't random or born from inexperience. Then with a cutting tone, she mocks Flick for his lack of imagination, leaving him fuming but unable to retort. Master Magus then dismisses the loss of the potion, noting it wasn't their only weapon. He then turns to Sophia and asks for their next course of action, so Sophia reveals a shift in the situation, and she informs them that Citri and Gark have now allied with the Hunters. Everyone is shocked that the branch manager of the association is here, so Sophia grimly points out that their task has grown more challenging now that they've lost the advantage of their slimy monsters. Then when Master Magus suggests retreating, Sophia immediately vetoes the idea because returning empty-handed would damage their reputation in Akashic Tower. She stresses urgency since their enemies already hold captives who could reveal critical information at any moment, but Flick interjects confidently and assures her that their captives would never betray them as they've sworn unwavering loyalty to their leader. Sophia expresses hope in his claim but warns that even silence won't stop Citri from deducing their hideout. Sophia then decisively declares that their best chance is a preemptive strike, so she orders the Malice Eaters to overwhelm the enemy. Noctis agrees with her bold plan but voices concern, noting the creatures are only partially trained and need a competent commander. But without hesitation, Sophia nominates Flick and instructs him to unleash all the creatures simultaneously, but then she warns him not to fail with such a formidable force at his disposal. Though visibly uneasy, Flick begrudgingly accepts the task and vows to deliver success this time around. The scene then shifts to the Hunter's camp, where Talia observes Citri immersed in her work to uncover the Akashic Tower headquarters. Talia then reflects on Citri's exceptional nature. She's a rare type of hunter, an alchemist like Talia herself, brimming with talent and passion. A genius by birth and a relentless hard worker, willing to conduct any experiment necessary to uncover the truth. Talia then reflects on her brilliance and admits that standing beside Citri fills her with a mix of fear and jealousy, and she feels certain that she could never measure up to someone so extraordinary. As Talia drifts through her thoughts, Sven approaches and asks if something's on her mind. She brushes it off as nothing, but then Sven changes the subject, bringing up Kray's frustrating habit of withholding information, and she nods in agreement. Sven then remarks on the captured Akashic Tower members, who have been staring at Talia ever since they arrived. Talia is puzzled, but Sven jokes that it might be her unusual hair color, then tells her to let him know if anything happens before heading off. Later, Citri is still engrossed in her work when Gark advises her to take a break, offering her coffee. He reassures her that handling the Akashic Tower is not something the association can do alone. Citri, however, confidently announces she has pinpointed the enemy's rough location, and she explains to everyone how she analyzed ley lines, mana concentrations, and monster activity to deduce that the Akashic Tower must be hidden near the cliff, and her detailed explanation leaves everyone in awe. Seeking confirmation from Master Magus' disciples, she's met with their panic denials, which only heightens her suspicions. So Citri boldly suggests launching an attack immediately to capture Noctis. Sen, along with Gark, agrees, and they are ready to move out. Meanwhile, The captives then beg Sophia to untie them, which puzzles the group, so they speculate that Sophia might be an ally lurking nearby, but Citri unimpressively says that it would be far simpler if Sophia just revealed herself. She then elaborates further and reveals that Sophia is not only Noctis' disciple, but also her personal nemesis, an elusive figure that she has relentlessly pursued. Citri then declares that the only way to end the Akashic Tower's experiments is by capturing both Master Magus and Sophia. However, the captives scoff, insisting that Sophia will never lose to someone like Citri, but Citri firmly counters and vows to defeat her nemesis and ensure Sophia lands in prison. Meanwhile, Cray, Tino, and Liz make their way to White Wolf's den. Cray reflects that he'd rather wait for everything to blow over before arriving, but Liz, impatient as ever, urges him to hurry, warning that Citri's life might be at stake. Cray, on the other hand, grimly muses that he's the one likely to end up dead because he realized that he forgot to charge his relics and even didn't bring enough safety rings. Tino then informs him that they're closing in on the den, but Cray can't make out anything in the darkness, so he activates one of his relics to enhance his vision. As they proceed, Tino nervously reaches for Cray's hand, saying she doesn't want to get separated in the dark. But before she can grab it, Liz sharply intervenes, declaring that Tino isn't worthy of such an honor, and then she scolds Tino extensively, commanding her to keep such fantasies confined to her dreams until she proves herself deserving. Liz then turns to Cray and confidently assures him that she'll handle any threats and vows to eliminate anyone in their path. Cray then silently hopes the others are holding their own. We see Sven, Citri, Gark, and others as they press onward. On the way, Jai muses aloud that he's starting to grasp the full extent of Cray's greatness, while Citri confidently predicts that Cray will reach the coveted rank of level 10 hunter someday. This piques Jai's interest, making him even more eager to meet Cray, whom he assumes must be immensely powerful. Citri, however, corrects him, explaining that Cray's strength isn't what makes him a level 8 hunter. In fact, she adds that even if Cray were weaker in combat than a sand rabbit, it wouldn't make a difference, leaving Jai thoroughly baffled. Their conversation is cut short by a sudden lightning strike, revealing Flick, who descends dramatically astride a Malice Eater. Flick lands and is confident that he overpowered them, though he notes he may have used too much mana for the strike, but he is sure it was worth it because it's a one-shot kill. However, his smugness evaporates when he sees Sven still conscious, so he is determined to finish the job and prepares to bury Sven. But his real shock comes when Citri emerges completely unharmed. Citri then chastises Flick for unleashing such a reckless, large-scale attack while they still have hostages, but Flick is still stunned and demands to know how she survived his Calamity Thunder unscathed. So Citri casually responds that such a weak attack doesn't compare to the trials they endure daily in high-level dungeons. Flick stubbornly refuses to believe it, so Citri ignores him completely and uses a water gun to spray a potion and heal Sven. Sven charges forward, attacking Flick before turning his focus on the monster, but with one heavy strike, his sword shatters. Meanwhile, Gark, now healed, steps in to finish off the monster. Citri systematically heals the rest of the group, giving clear commands as she works. Gark, amazed by her ingenuity, can't believe how cleverly she uses a water gun to administer potions. Back at the hideout, Noctis is furious that Flick once again ignored Sophia's advice and took only a single Malice Eater with him, and questions if Flick is even capable of grasping the gulf between his mind and Sophia's. Just then, one of the leader's disciples reports that the enemy continues to advance relentlessly, and adds bitterly that nothing is unfolding as planned and wonders if Thousand Tricks is orchestrating this chaos intentionally. The group then urges their leader to retreat, promising to hold off the enemy with the remaining Malice Eaters. But the leader declares they aren't fleeing yet, not while they still have their ace Akasha and Sophia as well. So he insists they won't abandon this stronghold until they face absolute defeat, and commands his followers to crush the enemy and claim victory. Meanwhile, Sven, Citri, Gark, and her allies close in on the headquarters. Sven realizes she's pushing them to cut through the enemy before being overwhelmed, but it feels like an impossible demand, just like something Cray would propose. Gark, however, disagrees, saying it's not impossible for him. He declares the three of them will go in first, with the mages following, and their strategy is to take down the chimeras first, and let everyone else storm in to mop up. And we see that Gark's still fuming over Liz mocking him earlier and vows not to let it slide. Elsewhere, Cray and his group reach the spot where Citri and her team were struck by the lightning spell, and while they investigate, Liz scoffs and dismisses it as little more than a weak attack, so they press on without hesitation. Meanwhile, the hunters charge toward the cave, but the members of the Akashic Tower are prepared to fight back on their flying lions. Yet it's all a diversion, merely a ruse to buy time as Magus deep in his lab activating their ultimate weapon. With a decisive press of buttons, a stone statue crumbles, revealing a towering golem. Magus, brimming with confidence, declares this masterpiece as the Akashic Tower's greatest weapon, certain it will crush their enemies. The golem then strides out of the cave, where Gark, undeterred, stands ready to face it. The golem swings its massive sword, forcing Gark to muster all of his strength to block the blow. Seeing their strongest opponent held at bay, the other members of the Akashic Tower seize the moment, launching a counteroffensive while their flying lions soar beyond the reach of Sen and his allies. Amidst the chaos, with everyone locked in combat or biding their time, the two prisoners quietly struggled to free their bound hands. Then we see that one of the lions dives at Sven and wounds him, but he quickly heals himself and rallies his team, shouting for them to hold their ground. But the treasure hunters appear to be on the brink of collapse, but then out of nowhere Liz arrives. And with her blinding speed, she strikes a flying lion, dragging it to the ground. Then we see that her arrival electrifies the group, so Sven commands them to press the attack. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Cray and Tino find themselves alone. Cray worries about Liz's absence, now lacking his dependable protector. But suddenly, Tino senses a presence nearby, so she asks Cray if she should eliminate the threat, but he dismisses it, assuming it's just wild animals. And then we see that the figures Tino detected are the escaped prisoners from the Akashic Tower, and they are puzzled by Cray's indifference. Oblivious to the truth, Cray resumes her journey, only for his night vision lenses to fail without warning, forcing him to rely on Tino to lead the way. Back on the battlefield, Liz is absolutely wiping the floor with the flying lions, mocking the other treasure hunters for struggling with just this. She calls Citri a weakling, prompting Citri to snap, asking her what the hell she's even doing here. Liz then casually explains to her sister that she begged Cray to let her join, and then she dives right back into action. Moving like the Flash, she blitzes the golem, but it turns out to be tougher than expected. Undeterred, she doubles down, repeatedly hitting it at full speed, forcing it back and causing cracks to appear. Gark, not about to let Liz show him up, charges in with his iced axe, striking the golem and freezing it on impact. The golem collapses as Sven aims to be ready to shoot at it. The golem briefly powers down, but it quickly reboots and goes on the offensive. Sten then shoots his arrow and Gark swings his axe again, but the golem dodges them effortlessly and then leaps high into the air like a freaking robot. Nobody can believe a hulking piece of junk like this could move so fast. It reminds them of Ansa and one of the 6 Reavers, equally massive but somehow even more agile. Liz briefly wonders if this golem was modeled after her friend, but she quickly brushes it off because she only needs to focus on destroying it. She then leaps at it, but the golem surprises her by detaching its hand to reveal a cannon, firing an energy shot. Liz manages to dodge, but the blast grazes her belly, forcing her to retreat because long-range attacks aren't her strong suit, and she's forced to keep moving as the golem bombards her with more shots. From the sidelines, Citri watches in concern, concluding that brute force alone won't take the golem down, and they need to drain its battery. Liz bristles at the suggestion and charges in to prove she can handle it herself. So she unleashes a devastating combo that topples the golem, and Gark sees this opening by attacking its foot to finish the job. But just as they think they've won, the golem activates thrusters on its back and takes off into the air, and seeing this makes Liz give up on beating the golem by brute force. Just then, Cray shows up and casually asks how everyone's doing. He's completely unfazed by the massive golem towering in front of them, and the group feels a surge of relief because after all, the strongest hunter is finally here, and they're certain the fight will end in no time. But suddenly the golem lunges through the air toward Cray, sending Tino scrambling to cling to him in fear. But Cray remains clueless, acting as if nothing is happening. But before the golem can hit, it's suddenly repelled, slamming into a wall and powering down. The group then stares in awe, demanding to know what secret move Cray pulled off this time. A little do they realize Cray never even saw the golem because his mana lenses had run out of power, so he cluelessly asks Tino why everyone is acting like something big just happened. And with that, the battle is over, and the treasure hunters proceed to raid the Akashic Tower's base, confiscating everything they can get their hands on. Later, Cray receives a report from Citri, who thanks him for sending Liz to back them up at the perfect moment. However, the conflict isn't over yet, so Citri declares her intent to personally bring down the Akashic Tower. Meanwhile, the 2 escaped prisoners from earlier regroup with Magus and the remnants of the defeated faction. The prisoners then inform Magus that the red-haired alchemist among the treasure hunters is undoubtedly Sophia, and they suspect she has infiltrated their base with a scheme in mind. But Magus, drained of all confidence after witnessing Cray's power, wants no part of another clash. Unable to predict what Cray might do next, he decides to flee the Empire entirely and orders his men to summon Sophia back. Elsewhere, Cray attends a meeting with Gark and a government official who demand information about the Akashic Tower. Cray, true to form, admits outright that he doesn't know a thing and bluntly suggests they talk to Citri instead, as she was the one in charge. The government official visibly tenses at the mention of her name because it turns out that 3 years ago, a major jailbreak implicated Citri, leading to her demotion to rank 2 and the loss of her title. However, Gark personally intervened to clear her name, and since then, government officials have kept their distance from her. Back at the makeshift base of Akashic Tower, Magus' disciples present a frightened girl they captured, believing her to be Sophia. She trembles as she asks what they plan to do to her, but Magus cuts her off, demanding she drop the act. Yet the girl insists she isn't Sophia. And when a flying lion suddenly grows hostile toward her, Magus hesitates and realizes she's telling the truth. At that moment, the real Sophie strides in with a bottle of wine, leaving everyone stunned. Surprisingly, Sophia barely reacts to seeing her identical double, and instead she casually points out to Magus that while they may look alike, there are subtle differences. Then without warning, she removes her wig and robe, revealing herself to actually be Citri, so the room erupts into chaos. Magus then furiously demands to know how she dares cosplay as Sophia, but Citri calmly states that she is the same Sophia they know. Shock ripples through the room, and the others accuse her of betraying them all along. But Citri denies the accusations and explains that she joined the Akashic Tower because she deeply admired Magus' groundbreaking work. She still respects his insatiable curiosity and drive for knowledge, and her only goal was to support him and witness the results of his research. But now Citri says that it's time to put an end to it, and she reveals that Kray's decision to let Magus' men go without capturing them was not an act of mercy, but it was a warning for her to stop and return to him. Citri then reassured Magus that she hadn't betrayed his secrets, but she admitted that Kray's uncanny ability to detect lies meant he likely knew the truth anyway. And then she revealed that every opportunity they had to test their research against high-level hunters was orchestrated by Kray. And while the experiment was largely a success for the most part, Citri had to intervene the previous night during the golem's attack because she didn't want to be obliterated. But now she grimly says that the research had been confiscated and their arrests are imminent, but despite this, Citri vowed to continue the work. And she adds that since Sophia never truly existed, no one will find her and all the blame will fall squarely on Magus' ass. Citri then strides to her assistant, remarking that her vivid red hair made her stand out in the crowd, so she borrowed her appearance, so the assistant breaks down in tears and collapses. The disciples of the Akashic Tower then lash out in fury, rushing at Citri, but she calmly summons her flying lion, whose imposing presence forces them to retreat. But Magus retaliates with a devastating fire attack, killing the lion instantly. Citri, however, emerges unscathed, revealing she had prepared for this. She then unveils the Citri slime that Kray lost, which absorbed the attack to shield her. To their horror, the slime begins devouring the lion's body as Citri declares it her finest work, designed to grow endlessly by consuming mana. Magus freezes, realizing the slime could potentially consume the earth itself. But Citri smirks and explains that she just wants to test the slime's capabilities against a powerful mage like him. Magus' disciples then deploy a smoke bomb, urging him to flee while they hold off the golden slime. But as Magus escapes, he crashes into a muscular figure at the doorway, tumbling down the stairs in shock, and when he looks up, he recoils in terror. Then Citri appears and calmly explains her pursuit of strength to rival her friends, but she found that golem creation is too time-consuming and costly, so she created a pet chimera instead. And to do this, she raided a high-security prison, using the escaped criminals as raw material. And that shit makes Magus horrified to realize he's up against the most ruthless person he's ever encountered. Citri then dons her mask, stating that Magus himself will make excellent raw material for her experiments, and at her command, the chimera kills him instantly. The remaining disciples are arrested and Citri erases their memories. She even wipes her assistant's mind before reporting back to Kray that everything ended smoothly. She then promises to be more cautious with her materials next time, but Kray remains oblivious to what she truly means. The scene then shifts to the Hunter Association, where a meeting is underway about the Akashic Tower incident. Kray boldly asks the officials to hand over the Akasha Golem and the Malice Eater from the confiscated items, but the officials puzzledly ask why he would want a Malice Eater, and thinking it sounds like the name of a lousy drink. So Kray jokingly says he wants to try drinking it. His response leaves them baffled, and later it's revealed that Kray managed to get the Malice Eater, but the Akasha Golem remained out of his reach. Apologizing to Citri for this shortfall, she reassures him it's fine and heads off to retrieve the Malice Eater, while Kray waits in the lobby. While waiting, Kray bumps into Gark, who asks if he's heard about a party called Falling Fog. Gark explains they have recently arrived in the capital from the land of Fog Nebula noobs, and their leader Arnold Hale is a level 7 hunter, a fact that surprises Gark when Kray admits he's never heard of them. Kray admits he's simply not interested, prompting Gark to reveal that Arnold is a dragon slayer who defeated the legendary Thunder Dragon. But Kray unfazedly reminds Gark that he too is a dragon slayer. Gark laughs and agrees but warns Cray not to stir up any trouble, playfully patting his back, but shockingly his friendly jab ends up costing Cray a safety ring. As Gark departs, Cray's attention shifts to a poster announcing the upcoming Zabrudian auction. He recalls that it's a prestigious national event held annually, showcasing rare and highly sought-after relics. The quality and quantity of the items in the auction are unmatched, making it a must-attend event for enthusiasts. Cray is too desperate to go, but then he remembers that he's flat broke, so he considers borrowing from Citri. But he quickly remembers he hasn't paid back his previous loans, which are already piling up, making it impossible for him to ask her again. At that moment, Chloe approaches him, and Cray remembers she's Gark's niece. Unlike her uncle, she's adorable, prompting Cray to muse that genetics in anime seem to only work when convenient. Chloe asks if something happened, noting her uncle seemed unusually cheerful. Cray speculates it might have to do with the dragon slayer Gark mentioned earlier, so Chloe immediately realizes he's talking about Arnold Hale from Falling Fog. But before the conversation can go further, Citri shows up and cuts it short. True to form, Cray remains utterly uninterested in the Falling Fog party and leaves with Citri without giving it a second thought. On the way, Cray asks Citri if she's carrying the Malice Eater in her bag, and she confirms that she is. They pass by a peculiar party, unaware that this is Falling Fog. Falling Fog later enters the Hunters Association, but the receptionist doesn't recognize them, leaving them feeling underestimated as mere country bumpkins. Meanwhile, at Footprints, Cray notices the little Malice Eater and finds it oddly cute. Evil wonders if the creature might bite, but Citri reassures her that it's safe, as she is trained not to harm her or Cray. The Malice Eater then cuddles with Cray, but as it moves around in his arms, it begins reducing his safety rings one by one, so Cray starts to question whether it's truly harmless. Realizing it's just playing but fearing it might play him to death, he hands it back to Citri. He then learns she's named it Namamono and wonders if she's serious about keeping that name, but she reminds him that he's the one who named it, though Cray insists it must have been an accident. Thinking ahead, Cray decides he'll need to recharge his relics before this creature comes to play to the death with him again, so he asks Citri when Lucia will return. Citri explains it will take a while because a strong swordsman phantom appeared in the boss room, and Luke, being obsessed with swords like always, insisted on fighting it alone, so the entire group won't return until he manages to win one-on-one against the phantom. Cray wishes Lucia would just come home alone, but Citri hands him a relic that can store a single spell inside. Cray notes he already has one like it, a gift from Lucia, and wonders why she's giving him another, but Citri doesn't explain and simply tells him to wear it on his ring finger if he wants. Meanwhile, Falling Fog is at a hotel, still irritated by being underestimated by everyone in the city. One of their members rationalizes that as outsiders, they'll have to prove their worth through their skills. The rest agree, and Arnold is especially eager to demonstrate his strength and earn respect in the city. Later, Citri is seen giving Cray a very relaxing massage, during which Cray mentions his need to charge his relics. He admits there are several that require recharging, but only Lucia is capable of handling them all. Citri assures him she'll take care of it, and later she gathers the mages of their clan. She announces a special training regimen and magic cultivation techniques that Cray devised, promising it's nothing like his usual life and death training methods. To entice them, she claims that anyone participating in this training could potentially become a mage on par with Lucia. The mages are shocked that Cray could create such an appealing program. Citri then asks for volunteers, but despite some discussion among the group, no one steps forward. But then a party called Starlight, comprised of two noble spirits named Lapis and Chris, steps up. Chris, however, takes the opportunity to insult Cray, calling him a weakling. Lapis quickly reprimands her, pointing out that while Cray may be incompetent, he is still their clan master. Chris reluctantly quiets down but struggles to believe that this man could be Lucia's older brother, given how different they are. Cray then explains that noble spirits are essentially elves, but the writer wanted to mix things up by renaming them, though their traits remain unchanged. It's revealed that Chris has a certification level of 3 and Lapis a level of 4, and Cray notes that noble spirits tend to look down on less talented mages. Lapis then asks Citri if she truly believes anyone can achieve Lucia's level through this training. Citri confidently explains that this regimen is the reason behind Lucia's exceptional abilities. Encouraged by this, Marietta, a member of the Obsidian Cross, volunteers to try it out, so Citri pleasantly hands her a relic to recharge. But despite her best efforts, Marietta struggles to recharge it initially. Citri urges her to keep trying, and eventually Marietta succeeds. However, Citri immediately hands her another relic, continuing the process. Then this cycle repeats until Marietta exhausts all her mana and collapses. Citri then explains that mana capacity can typically increase only until a person reaches their teens, after which further growth becomes impossible. However, when someone overuses their mana and enters a state of mana exhaustion, there's a small window during recovery where the upper limit of their mana can be increased by a few percent. She emphasizes that this is an opportunity for those beyond their growth period to enhance their mana reserves. Sen comments that this method involves pushing oneself to the absolute limit, while Chris remarks that even noble spirits require significant time to recover after draining their mana, making the process inefficient. In response, Citri pulls out one of her unusual potions, which instantly restores Marietta's mana and boosts her mana cap. She explains that by repeating this cycle, one can steadily increase their mana capacity and refine their skills. Cry wonders if this is the method Lucia used to achieve her incredible power, and Lapis questions if this is truly the same training Lucia underwent. Citri confirms it is but notices Starlight's skepticism. She recalls their previous attempts to recruit Lucia and taunts them, saying Lucia isn't interested in joining because they overestimate themselves and avoid proper training. The jab hits its mark and both noble spirits demand all the relics so they can prove themselves, so Kill hands them the relics, and seeing Starlight participating, the other mages eagerly join in as well. And while the mages charge the relics, Citri assures Cray that this should resolve his issue. Meanwhile, in another place, Ark is seen in conversation with a noble who inquires about his response to a proposal. Ark declines, stating that he still has much to learn. The noble realizes Ark is referring to Cry and decides to bide his time for an exclusive contract. He then asks Ark if he has met Earl Gladys and mentions that the Earl's daughter has been looking for him, and at that moment Claire arrives. Later, Cry visits Liz and Tino asks him to wait while Liz is taking a bath. During the wait, the perv Citri attempts to recruit Tino as her disciple in her own weird way, promising to make her stronger with ease. However, noticing how uncomfortable Tino becomes, Cry steps in and firmly tells Citri to back off. Liz then calls out to Tino for her towel, but impatient as ever, walks straight out of the bath without waiting for it. Citri quickly covers Cray's eyes before he can see anything inappropriate and scolds Liz, asking her to show some modesty. Liz, clueless about the concept, strolls around without a care in the world. She casually asks Cray what he needs, and he tells her that he wanted to celebrate the return of both Liz and Citri from their quest. Liz, touched by his thoughtfulness, tries to hug him, but Citri steps in to stop her. While the sisters bicker, Cry invites Tino to join them, and she gladly agrees. Later, the falling fog party is shown wandering through the city in search of a bar, while at the same time Cray, Citri, Tino, and Liz are already enjoying drinks at one. Liz, who had been locked in a drinking contest with Citri, is completely drunk, while Citri remains sober. Liz suspiciously insists something is off, as she usually doesn't get drunk so easily, and she's right because there are hints that Citri has been spiking Liz's drinks. Tino notices but wisely stays out of the sisters' feud. As the next round arrives, Citri quietly spikes Liz's beer again, urging her to continue the contest. But this time, Cry intervenes, swapping the spiked drink with Citri's own glass. Liz then downs her own glass without a second thought, while Citri hesitates but realizes there's no escape and reluctantly drinks it. Soon both sisters are thoroughly drunk and start venting their frustrations to Cry. Citri accuses Cray of seeing her as nothing more than a walking wallet, reminding him that his debt to her has reached an eye-watering 10 digits. Cry reassures her that he'll pay her back, but Citri, not entirely satisfied, cheekily suggests he could repay her with his body, but Liz intervenes before Citri can grab him. At that moment, Falling Fog barges into the bar, shoving random patrons aside and introducing themselves like a rowdy biker gang, and they boast about their leader Arnold being a level 7 hunter, leaving the crowd in awe. And then they demand booze and women to celebrate their arrival. Liz, unimpressed, approaches with a drink in hand, but Arnold insults her, saying he has no interest in kids. But Liz unbotheredly reveals that she wasn't planning to serve him anyway, and she promptly pours the drink over his head and then smashes the mug on his damn head. Chaos ensues as Liz takes down Arnold and his lackeys with ease, scoffing at how weak they are. With the commotion settled, the bar patrons resume their revelry, so Cry, ever polite, apologizes to Arnold and his party before leaving the bar with Liz and Tao. Elsewhere, Chloe reflects on how 3 years ago, she failed the exam to join First Steps. The examiner was Luke, so with him in charge, she didn't stand a chance. The poor girl took it way too seriously, convincing herself she wasn't cut out to be a hunter, so she settled for being a receptionist at the Hunter Association instead. Meanwhile, back at the clan house, Eva brings up Liz's scuffle with Arnold and his party. Cry, clueless as ever, hadn't even realized that it was his party Liz flattened until Eva filled him in. Eva warns Cray that Arnold's group has a solid reputation and picking a fight with them might be a problem. Cry, ever laid back, hopes that Liz's punch was enough to make them forget the whole thing. But Eva reminds Cray that Arnold once took down a thunder dragon, so she advises settling things peacefully and decides to contact Gark to mediate. Cry agrees, but is clearly distracted, daydreaming about how delicious a grilled thunder dragon would taste. Eva, understandably baffled, asks where this thought even came from, so Cry casually mentions that Citri once cooked it for him, and now he's craving it again. Eva points out that thunder dragon meat is unheard of as food, considering how valuable its body parts are, but Cray shrugs it off, saying it'd just be nice to eat it. Meanwhile, the members of Falling Fog stew over their humiliating defeat. Arnold is fuming and convinced that the woman who beat him must be a well-known hunter in the city, and his pride won't let this slide, so he vows to make her pay for tarnishing the reputation of Falling Fog. Later at the Hunter Association, Chloe notices Arnold's party and guesses they're here to file a complaint about last night's incident. But they say that they are not, and Arnold asks her about the name of the girl who beat him up. Gark appears at just the right moment and smugly reveals Liz's name, introducing himself as the branch manager of the association. And with an irritating smirk, Gark claims he warned Liz's guardian to keep her in check, though it seems the message didn't stick. Then with a smug, he tells Arnold that Liz's guardian was at the bar last night and his name is Cryandre, a level 8 hunter. Arnold and his crew are floored by the revelation, but Gark assures them that Cray isn't the type to bully people and promises that Liz won't lay a finger on them again. Gark's smug expression pushes Arnold to the brink, and just to twist the knife even deeper, he gleefully reveals that Cray sent a message specifically for Arnold. And with dramatic flair, Gark reads the message aloud, leaving everyone present to wonder if Cry might have made a terrible choice in picking his mediator. In the message, Cry, in his usual oblivious style, casually asks Arnold to bring him some thunder dragon meat so he can grill it. This final jab makes Arnold explode with rage, so he orders his party to gear up because they're going after Thousand Tricks. Back at the clan house, Eva confronts Cray about the rumors swirling around his debt to Citri, specifically that it's a staggering 10 digits. She asks if he even knows the exact amount, and unsurprisingly, he starts counting on his fingers, making it painfully clear that he doesn't. Eva then presses further, asking what Citri said about the debt, so Cray, with his usual nonchalance, recalls the 3 options she gave him for repayment. The first option is to throw her into prison, which would automatically cancel the debt. However, Citri begged him not to choose this route, saying it would be lonely, but if he did, she suggested throwing her sister in with her so she'd have someone to keep her company. Cray, being Cray, refused, pointing out that Citri hadn't done anything wrong. So she moved on to the second option. She could become his bride, consolidating their assets and effectively erasing the debt. Cray unimpressively asked for the third option, and she said he could become her husband, which to his frustration was just the same damn idea phrased differently. He then jokingly tells Eva that his only option is to marry Citri, which earns him a scolding, but he quickly reassures her that he's only joking and he's planning to pay back the debt. Eva then points out that his current salary as the head of First Steps makes repayment manageable, provided he stops spending recklessly. She then offers an alternative, diving into a treasure vault solo to clear the debt faster, but he horrifiedly wonders if she wants to kill him, as soloing a treasure vault would be a death sentence given his abilities. Eva rolls her eyes and offers to draft a sensible repayment plan for him and firmly advises him not to rack up more debt, and with that she leaves. Later, we see Cray gazing into the sky, his thoughts drifting to the upcoming auction, so he wonders what he should do. Meanwhile, in the town, we see Falling Fog gathering intel on Cray, but all they uncover are vague and exaggerated rumors about him pulling off impossible feats. Later, they report their findings to Arnold, describing Cray as an enigma surrounded by stories too wild to be credible. They note that Cray hasn't participated in any recent missions, leaving Arnold to theorize that Cray avoids combat simply because he hasn't yet met someone worthy of his strength. However, his lackeys counter this idea, revealing that no one has ever actually seen Cray fight. So this leads Arnold to conclude that Cray is likely a strategist who reached level 8 through the efforts of his friends rather than his own abilities. Arnold's party members assume Cray must be weak, but Arnold admits Cray might have some strength but dismisses him as a joke, claiming that compared to someone like himself, who climbed to level 7 through sheer power alone, Cray is as weak as a toy. Arnold then fired up and declares his intention to exact revenge on Cray and prove to everyone in the capital that Falling Fog is not just a bunch of country bumpkins. Back at the clan house, Tino climbs up to the balcony where Cray is sitting, asking if he needs anything. Cray becomes confused, so Tino explains that he was smiling at her, so she came to check on him. Cray realizes she must have been watching him from below, so they take a sit inside. Then Cray begins telling Tino about his massive debt, but Tino misunderstands and assumes he's asking her for money, thinking she's been tricked again. She quickly points out that she can't help much since she needs her funds to repair her gear and prepare for the next raid. But Cray reassures her, explaining that he's not asking for money, and that his debt is in the 10-digit range, so it's far beyond what she could offer. Tina was shocked that anyone could owe such a massive amount, convinced that only someone as extraordinary as her master could pull it off. Cry then reveals that he borrowed the money from Citri and insists it's no big deal, and he casually adds that if worst comes to worst, he'll just marry Citri to clear the debt. This revelation stuns Tino even further, and she's appalled at the thought of her master being owned by one person forever. But before she can spiral into despair, Cry changes the subject and suggests they go out for some sweets, so the two are then seen strolling through the town on an impromptu date. While walking, Tino proposes that Cray join her in exploring a treasure vault to help pay off his debt, and she reasons that they could sell any valuable relics they find at the upcoming auction. Cry then exasperatedly wonders if she is to try and get him killed, but Tino confidently insists that Cry would have no trouble finding treasure vaults filled with valuable relics. Cry sighs because if he had that kind of ability, he wouldn't have needed to take on a massive debt in the first place, and he tells Tino to hold onto that idea for another time. At the same time, Falling Fog wanders the town, frustrated about how they're going to find Thousand Tricks on their own since ambushing him at his clan is out of the question. Just then, as if fate had a twisted sense of humor, Cry strolls right in front of them. They stop him, but Cry, as oblivious as ever, doesn't even recognize them. Arnold reminds him of their encounter at the bar last night and mocks him for having the nerve to show up. Finally, Cry recalls who they are, but before he can react, Tino jumps in and boldly taunts them not to even think of fighting her master, claiming he's practically a god. Cry, hoping to avoid conflict, calmly tells them he's on a date with Tino and has no intention of causing trouble. And in his usual nonchalant style, he even offers to kneel and apologize if it would smooth things over, but Tino quickly stops him, taunting them further by saying that her master is only worried they'll lose their confidence after he beats them up. That's the final straw for Arnold and his group, so they demand a fight. Left without a choice, Cray agrees, but he insists they move to a more public place. The curious crowd then gathers to watch, but Cray is disappointed to see no members of First Steps among them, because he had secretly hoped for someone from his clan to show up to bolster their numbers or their fight chance. Arnold gets confused by Cray's strange behavior and asks how long he plans to stall. Cry apologizes, but Arnold cuts him off with a sneer, accusing him of lacking any real skill and claiming he's only gotten this far thanks to his friends. Tino, unable to tolerate the insult, steps in angrily and asks Cry to let her fight in his place to defend his honor. Much to everyone's shock, especially Tino's, Cry agrees almost instantly, clearly eager for an excuse to avoid the fight. Tino freezes for a moment because she's only been joking, but it's too late now. Tino then reluctantly gears up and charges at Arnold, but it quickly becomes clear that she's no match for him because Arnold easily blocks her attacks. And as the fight continues, Craig grows more desperate, scanning the crowd again and again for any sign of First Steps members, but he finds none. A man named A from Arnold's party sternly reminds Cray not to look away while Tino is fighting for his sake. So Cray starts cheering for Tino like an overexcited fool, embarrassing her even further. Tino gives it everything she's got, but Arnold's strength completely outclasses her. He blocks her attacks effortlessly, and even when she manages to land a hit, it does no damage. So Arnold angrily slams her into the ground and demands that Cry quit joking around and fight him personally. Cry realizes he has no choice now and decides to use the relic that Lucia prepared for him. He recalls how he had asked her to create a spell capable of subduing high-level hunters without killing them, a spell that would cover a large area but only target those he considered enemies. Lucia was exasperated by the absurdly specific request, thinking he was asking for the impossible, but she had refused to give up and managed to craft the spell. Back in the present, Arnold and his party are pinned to the ground, subdued by the relic's magic. Cry calmly explains that the spell is gravity manipulation, which shocks Arnold, who starts wondering if Cry is secretly a mage. Cry dismisses the question, saying it doesn't matter, and instead lays down some conditions for any future fights. Arnold, struggling under the intense gravity, asks what the conditions are, so Cry tells him that since he is the clan master of First Steps, anyone who wants to challenge him must first defeat the clan's main parties, which are the Obsidian Cross, Starlight, and Arc Brave. And only after besting those three teams will Arnold earn the right to fight him. Arnold then passes out under the crushing weight of the spell, and the scene shifts to Cry and Tino relaxing at a cafe. Tino is visibly upset, feeling like she let her master down, so Cray reassures her, saying she doesn't need to worry and admitting that he misjudged the situation. He reflects that he's not great at gauging the strength of hunters once they reach a certain level, but Tino still broods over her perceived failure. Determined to redeem herself, she asks Cray to give her another chance, and she pleads for him to point her toward a treasure vault filled with priceless relics, promising to venture into it alone to help pay off his debt. And we see that Cray tells her something. Meanwhile, in the clan training room, Liz easily defeats a replica of the Akashic Golem. But despite her quick victory, she complains about wanting to fight the real thing. Citri tells her to settle for the replica since the real Akashic Golem is in the hands of the Investigative Bureau, whose rules are so strict that even Cry couldn't get it back. So Liz gets disappointed and decides to wrap up her training for the day, but then Citri informs her that Cry was attacked by Arnold's party earlier. So curiously, Liz asks how it ended, and Citri explains that Cray used gravity magic to handle the situation. Liz contemplates crushing Arnold's group, but ultimately decides to leave them alone until Cray says otherwise, and Citri agrees with her decision. Later, Cray is having tea with Chloe, who is questioning him about his encounter with falling fog. Cry casually mentions that Arnold and his group seemed really upset, and Chloe guesses it might have something to do with the message he sent them about the Thunder Dragon. But Cry unfazedly corrects her, saying he wasn't talking about grilled dragon, he meant grilled chicken. Chloe gets confused and asks what message she should deliver to clear things up, and Cry simply tells her to say that he will never forget them. Chloe gets skeptical and thinks that this sounds more like something he would say before forgetting them completely, but she lets it go. Shifting the topic, Chloe asks what Cry thinks of Arnold as a hunter, so Cray describes Arnold as big and strong and throws in the random observation that he seems to like women with large chests. But before Chloe can process this odd comment, Cray tries to excuse himself, but she stops him, asking why she failed her test 3 years ago. Cray has no idea what she's talking about, but falling back on his usual tactics, he dodges the question and tells her to figure it out on her own. To soften the blow, he reassures her that if she retook the test now, she'd easily pass. But for the moment, though, he advises her to stick to her job as a receptionist, pointing out how much the hunters rely on her. Cry then leaves, and on the way, he suddenly remembers the real reason Chloe failed. She was underage. The test requires candidates to be at least 15 years old, and she was a few months shy of that at the time. Meanwhile, Chloe misinterprets Cray's vagueness as a deliberate test because she convinces herself that he's trying to make her discover the answer on her own, believing this to be one of his legendary 1,000 trials. But in reality, she falls victim to yet another misunderstanding about Cray's intentions. The next day, Arnold and his crew are drowning their frustration in drinks, reeling from the humiliation they suffered at Cray's hands. They're fuming not just because Cray repeatedly mocked them, but also because he took them down without breaking a sweat or causing any physical harm to them. To add insult to injury, he even had the nerve to tell them to fight the strongest parties in his clan if they ever dared to challenge him again. Right then, the guy with the cannon-like hairstyle strolls in from his recon mission. He informs Arnold that he visited the 3 top parties Cray suggested they fight, only to be met with a mix of shock and pity. Sten, a leader of one such party, mockingly told him that Cray was likely messing with them and that they shouldn't take his antics seriously. Next, he approached the elf girl who was busy refilling relics for her team, and she boldly told him they weren't Cray's lackeys and had no interest in dealing with his nonsense. Lastly, he tried reaching Ark's party but didn't even get to see Ark. Instead, Ark's entourage told him outright to ignore anything that came out of Cray's mouth. Arnold, who had been sulking around stark naked, boils over with rage upon hearing this. He vows revenge against Cray, but one of his henchmen advises patience, suggesting they wait for the grand auction to get better gear, and if luck is on their side, they might even sell the strange relic that no one wanted in their kingdom. Meanwhile, Cray and Tino are visiting a relic shop to have a newly acquired item analyzed by an expert. Tino casually mentions she found it in a level 1 treasure vault after following Cray's advice, which leaves the old appraiser dumbfounded since the relic appears to be of significant value. Cray beams at the news and asks about its abilities, but the appraiser explains that detailed testing is required, which might take time due to the sheer number of relics he has to examine before the auction. Cray's excitement skyrockets when he hears this, so he eagerly asks the old man to show him the relics lined up for the auction and suggests he chat with Tino in the meantime. The old man reluctantly agrees, mostly because Tina reminds him of his granddaughter. As they talk, he asks her how she's been doing and advises her to lean on her friends if things get rough. He also mentions that despite Cray's bad habits, he's a dependable man, which immediately sends Tino spiraling into a mix of emotions. She gushes that her master is an incredible person, even though he's drowning in debt and prone to reckless decisions, so she humbly admits she's nowhere near his level. His little exchange worries the old man, making him question what kind of life lessons Tino is picking up. Determined to get some answers, he heads over to confront Cray, who has just discovered something extraordinary among the relics, and it's a mask made from the flayed face of a colossal titan. Cray, with stars in his eyes, is convinced the mask can let him alter his appearance at will. He reminisces about how he once had a similar mask, but Liz broke it because she found it too creepy. Now he's dead set on owning it again, thinking it would allow him to live freely without anyone bothering him. The old man arrives just as Cray is ogling the mask and tells him to leave because he's got work to do. But Cray says he's very interested in the mask and wants to negotiate directly with whoever sent it for appraisal. The old man grumbles that he hasn't even appraised it yet, but reluctantly agrees to arrange a meeting. Afterward, Cray and Tino step out for dessert, and while they're eating, Tino innocently asks how he plans to afford the bizarre mask. She points out that Citri is already spending a fortune on her research and supplying free mana potions to mages, so there's no extra money to spare, and this comment visibly stresses Cray. Then as they make their way back to the clan building, he begins brainstorming. If he asks Liz for money, she'll probably resort to robbing people, which might create more problems. He then keeps wondering if anyone else could lend him a substantial amount, but suddenly he spots a noble's carriage parked right in front of their building. Just then, a blonde girl shows up with Ark, thanking him for giving her a tour of the building. She remarks that while most hunters are nothing but stupid assholes, Ark is a true gentleman and she's glad to have seen where he works. Cray and Tino just stare at her silently, prompting Blondie to snap, asking what they're staring at. So Ark quickly introduces her as Claire, the daughter of an earl, and Cray as his clan master. Claire looks at Cray with obvious skepticism and says she's heard a lot about him, but thinks he looks far too weak to be a level 8. She throws more shade, adding that someone like him doesn't deserve to rank above Ark, but Cray unbotheredly listens to her insults with a calm smile. This only flusters Claire further, and she demands to know why he's not reacting. So Cray politely explains that having grown up poor and without proper manners, he's careful around nobles. The unexpected response leaves Claire feeling awkward and guilty, and she decides to leave immediately. Later, Cray makes small talk with Ark before casually asking if he has a lot of money. Ark, already knowing that Cray wants to buy a relic at an auction, flatly refuses to lend him any. Cray then disappointedly goes to Sten with the same request, only to get rejected again, and that shit makes Ark laughs his ass off at Cray's desperation. Word then spreads quickly that Cray is desperately trying to borrow money to buy a relic, and soon the entire clan knows, and the gossip even travels through the city like wildfire, with everyone speculating that it must be a legendary artifact if Cray is so desperate for it, causing its value to skyrocket. However, Cray is unable to secure any funds, so in the end he is forced to return to Citri. She assures him that she'll provide as much money as he needs, even putting her own priorities aside, which makes Cray feel both guilty and uneasy. Later, they wait for the relic's owner at a cafe, with Cray nervously hoping the negotiations go well. However, to his shock, the owner of the relic turns out to be Arnold, who is equally surprised to see Cray. They then sit down to negotiate, and while Citri and Arnold's lackey play mind games, Arnold suddenly speaks up. He points out that they don't even know the mask's true effect, but Cray's desperation clearly indicates he does. So Arnold refuses to make any deal until Cray reveals what he knows and demands the truth. Cray calmly replies that he can't share the details, but assures Arnold that the mask is dangerous and that using it is banned in their country, so he advises Arnold to let it go before he gets himself into trouble. This, however, strikes Arnold's ego, and he declares he won't sell the mask, but then hesitates. Arnold starts to overthink, wondering if Cray is using reverse psychology to manipulate him into keeping the dangerous relic. Deciding it's better to sell it now and avoid future headaches, Arnold changes his mind and offers Cray a deal he thinks Cray can't refuse. He sets the price at $10 million, shocking Cray, who had hoped Arnold would agree to sell it for $30 million. Citri reassures Cray that it's fine since Arnold set the price, and she promptly pulls out $10 million in cash to finalize the deal. However, things take a sudden turn when other patrons in the cafe, drawn by the relic's rumors, start a bidding war, which end up with Claire winning with a staggering bid of $100 million. Cray can't compete with that shit, so he spends the rest of the day sulking. Eva then explains that the price skyrocketed because of rumors about Cray borrowing money from Ark, and ironically, even Claire fails to secure the mask because more nobles become interested, so the government intervenes and decides to send the relic to the official auction. Eva then scolds Cray for trying to spend so much money when he's already in debt, and he promises her he won't do it again. But just then, Citri walks into the room carrying a massive bag of gold and announces that she's arranged $800 million so they can go toe-to-toe with the nobles. Eva is horrified at the sight of such a sum, but Citri coyly explains that she had been saving this money for her wedding with Cray, so it's only fair to use it early. Eva exasperatedly starts lecturing her, blaming her for Cray's irresponsibility, but Citri brushes it off, insisting it's her money, so she can do as she pleases. Tired of the argument, Cray quietly moves to the window to get some air. Not long after, Citri joins him and suggests they meet Claire to find out why she wants the relic and perhaps negotiate with her. Cray happily agrees, and they immediately head off to see Claire, who is clearly not happy about their visit. She glares at Cray, accusing him of being as bold as Ark for confronting her directly. Cray tries to explain that he isn't Ark's rival, just a friend, and admits he hasn't surpassed him. Claire misinterprets this, thinking he's mocking her crush, so she fired up and declares that she'll buy the strongest relic at any cost and give it to Ark so he can become the strongest. Cry calmly tells her that Ark wouldn't appreciate it, adding that no one can become the strongest simply by using a relic. But Claire refuses to back down and vows to secure the relic for Ark no matter what. But then Citri steps in and reveals their budget of $200 million and challenges Claire, saying if she can't arrange more than that, she should step aside. Claire gets disheartened and realizes she can't afford such a high amount, so she turns to her father for help, and he insists losing to Cry would bring dishonor to their family. Determined to win, he agrees to withdraw from their savings and even take out a loan, instructing Claire that she must win the auction against Cry. The scene then shifts to Cry and his group heading toward the auction venue, and Citri notes that they managed to gather $950 million in the end, estimating their chances of winning at about 70%. She adds that they could have raised more if Cry hadn't stopped her. Cry insists that this amount is enough, but Liz assures him not to worry, offering to steal the relic for him if they fail to secure it. Citri immediately warns against this, pointing out that it would make Cry a suspect in a robbery. But Cry then silently reflects on how much he wants the ugly relic, but concedes that it isn't worth excessive trouble, so he resolves to give up if they can't win it today. The scene then cuts to the auction house, where the group notices a large crowd has gathered. They meet Tino, Greg, Ruta, and Gilbert there, and Cry is pleased to see them. He remarks to Tino that she should have joined them earlier, but Tino reminds him he never invited her. Cry realizes he must have forgotten, adding that he avoided inviting her because he thought it better for her to stay out of the spotlight. Observing the crowd, Cray sees that he was right because everyone is talking about him and the relic he's after. So to avoid further attention, he asks Tino to participate in the auction on his behalf, and he explains that she only needs to bid when he signals her to do so. Tino agrees to help, but Liz looks disappointed, wishing she could bid instead. Cry quickly cheers her up, and Liz enthusiastically urges Tino to win at any cost. But Cry reassures Tino that if they lose, it won't be her fault, as he'll be deciding when to raise or fold. Claire then arrives at the auction house, and Citri, observing her confident demeanor, deduces that Claire has successfully gathered the necessary funds. The scene then cuts to the 14th item being sold at the auction, and Liz, already bored, impatiently asks Cray when they'll bring out the relic he's after. Cry explains that it's likely to be the final item since it's drawing a lot of attention, and he adds that he can't bid on anything else in the meantime because of their limited funds. So he frustratedly wishes the relic had come earlier because if he couldn't buy it, he at least have the option to purchase other items. Then as he observes the auction items, he notes that while they're only useful in specific cases, he still wants them badly. Cry then notices Tino glancing at him with every new item introduced, as if testing his resolve for relics. He struggles to resist bidding, wanting them all, but manages to restrain himself due to their tight budget. Then he remembers an alternate source of funding and considers bidding on one of the items, but just as he's about to make his move, the Akashic Golem is announced as the next auction item. Citri is visibly surprised, questioning why it's there, and Cry recalls that this was something she had her eye on when they acquired the Malice Eater. As the bidding for the Golem begins, Cry asks Citri what she wants to do. Citri hesitates, admitting that while she'd love to have it, purchasing it would mean forfeiting their chance at the relic Cry wants, and she explains that it cost her a lot of money and time to create, but is ultimately a memento of her comrades. So she tells Cry not to worry about it, but Cry knows better because he can tell she truly wants it. So he ignores her protests and signals Tino to bid. Then the price quickly skyrockets, climbing past $300 million and continuing to rise. Citri then turns to Cry, asking if he's really okay with this, and Cry assures her that this is the best way to spend their money, but he knows in the back of his mind that it's Citri's funds he's talking about. Then as the bidding intensifies, Cry reflects on what Citri said about the Golem being a memento of her comrades. So he speculates that the Golem might have been created by alchemist friends of hers who were kidnapped by the Akashic Tower. Then we see that the price for the Akashic Golem continues to climb, soon reaching $900 million. Citri grows anxious, realizing they won't be able to afford it if it goes beyond $950 million. And her fears come true as the bidding surpasses $1 billion, and she resigns herself to losing it. However, Cry doesn't stop bidding, and he manages to secure the Golem for $1,060 million. Liz quickly reminds him that they've gone $110 million over budget, warning that it could turn into a serious problem if they don't pay, but Cry calmly reassures her by handing her a check for $110 million. Citri thanks him, promising to pay him back, but Cray thinks to himself that she doesn't need to. Since the money wasn't his to begin with, it was Lucia's. So he wonders if it is really okay to use half of his sister's life savings without consulting her, but he decides to push the thought aside for now. To everyone's surprise, it is then announced that Greg is the winner of the Akashic Golem auction. And later, Cry learns that Tino didn't know how to participate in the auction process and had asked Greg for help, and since Greg was familiar with the process, Tino let him handle it. Cry isn't concerned, confident that Greg, being a veteran hunter, won't gossip about him or Citri. Gilbert then questions what Cry plans to do about the other relic now that so much money has been spent on the golem. Cry replies that he's already achieved his main goal and decides to head home, telling the others to enjoy the rest of the auction. As Cry exits the auction house, the event continues and the highly anticipated final item is unveiled. On his way home, Cry recalls Claire mentioning that she plans to give the strongest relic to Ark, and that shit sparks a brilliant idea in Cray's mind. The next day, Cry tells Ark to head to Claire, saying he'll understand everything once he's there. Ark's party grumbles about another of Cray's vague requests, but Cry reassures them that he has already warned Claire of the relic's dangers. Confident that Ark can handle it, Cry urges him to leave immediately or risk being late. Ark complies but asks if he should bring any weapons, and Cry advises against it, stating it's probably better to go unarmed. Ark hesitantly asks what will happen if he doesn't make it in time, and Cry nonchalantly replies that he'll be in grief. Later, Cry reflects that Ark will now retrieve the treasure, and he'll be able to buy it from him at a friendly discount, and he thinks he should have just done this from the beginning and hopes there won't be any complications along the way. Meanwhile, we see Claire in her room recalling how her father wasn't happy even after her auction victory. He claimed she only won because Cry let her and scolded her for spending $200 million on an ugly relic, and he also expressed disappointment at not getting to see what Cry is truly capable of. Claire frustratedly laments that despite all her hard work, no one recognizes her efforts and all she has to show for it is this ugly mask. Claire then examines the mask, wondering what's so special about it, convinced that she's just a weakling. Then suddenly the mask begins to speak, asking her if she desires power. As it moves, it claims it has been watching her for a long time, sensing her sadness and regret. Claire then grabs her sword to defend herself, but the mask tempts her, promising to grant her deepest desires before leaping at her. And at that moment, Claire remembers that Thousand Tricks warned this mask was dangerous, but before she can react, the mask takes control of her body. The scene then shifts to Ark arriving at Claire's house, where her father informs him that Claire has locked herself in her room since last night. He's hopeful that she will open the door for Ark and expresses gratitude that Ark came. Ark wonders what Cry was trying to tell him as they suddenly hear a commotion. Ark and his party rush to investigate and find a knight being thrown around. They soon discover that Claire is the cause of the chaos, and Ark notices the mask has attached itself to her. Claire, in her altered state, begs him not to look at her like this before hurling another knight at them. And she declares she has become stronger and vows to kill anyone who mocks her. Ark then steps forward, urging her to calm down. She recognizes him, and he asks what happened. So she, from her distorted voice, explains that she acquired the mask for him, calling it the strongest relic. She insists she fought hard to get it, and Ark thanks her, assuring her that everything will be fine. He then gently asks her to remove the mask, and she attempts to do so but pauses when she notices Ark holding a weapon. Ark recalls Cray's warning not to bring a weapon near Claire, but it's too late as Claire's anger flares as she sees the weapon. Realizing he has no other choice, Ark prepares to fight but instructs his party to attack with extreme care to avoid harming Claire. As the confrontation escalates, the scene shifts to Arnold's hotel. Arnold's team is jubilant, amazed that they managed to sell the cursed mask for $200 million. However, as they enter their room, they find Liz and Citri waiting for them. They confusedly demand to know why the two are there, and Liz explains they come to collect their share of the profits from the auction. She points out that they only managed to sell the relic for such a high price because of Cray's plan, and it's only fair they get a cut of the earnings. Arnold and his party refuse to share their rewards, prompting Citri to reveal an antidote she's willing to sell for $110 million. They scoff, accusing her of trying to trick them, but Citri explains the situation, revealing that the booze they drank earlier was poisoned, and she warns that the effects will soon kick in. Then as she speaks, everyone except Arnold begins to feel the symptoms. So Liz notes that Arnold, being a level 7 hunter, might survive, but the others won't be so fortunate, so Arnold reluctantly agrees to their demands. Later, Ark and his party return to the clan house, where they find Cry has prepared a party to celebrate their return. Seeing their expressions, Cry guesses that Claire must have thrown a tantrum, but Ark corrects him, saying she did far more than that, but as usual, Cry has no idea what the hell he is talking about. Ark then says that Cray is as vague as ever, and Cray asks him where the damn relic is. He shows it to him, and Cry eagerly opens the package, even though Ark warns him to not be freaking reckless. But Cray is thrilled to finally have the reverse face in his possession, but the relic begins to speak, surprised that it was subdued earlier. Cry is thrilled, while Claire apologizes for ignoring his warnings. However, Cry pays no attention and promptly puts on the relic. The relic attempts to possess him, but quickly realizes Cry has no powers, ambition, or greed, noting that all of his skills are ranked -E, so it releases him from its control, declaring him unworthy. Cry laughs at the revelation, recognizing that this isn't the reverse face after all. Still, he doesn't mind as a talking relic is rare enough, so he asks Ark if he can keep it, and Ark, creeped out by the relic, is more than happy to let him have it. Afterward, the party begins and Cry steps out onto the balcony alone. As he looks out over the city, he reflects on how this isn't the relic he was searching for, and wonders just how weak he truly is, considering even a 10-year-old managed to activate the mask. So he thinks that maybe it's time for him to finally retire. But this is the end of Season 1. So don't forget to like and subscribe to encourage me to do more, and don't forget to check the other videos on the channel.